The Powers Project.
Stan, it's great to meet you. I'm a big fan of yours. I'm glad that I finally got to meet you.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Even if it isn't in person, this is next to the best thing. So
It's all we get these days, man.
Exactly. Even with guests that I have that live here in the state and even the city, a lot of them are still wanting to do the Zoom meeting, and I don't blame them. I understand. So.
Yep. Even the kids are homeschooling on Zoom. It's we're used to it now. Might be the new future.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It might be the new future. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out here in the next several months. So.
Yeah.
And I just talked to you, and we talked about you being in Vegas, so you didn't have to deal with the fires on top of everything else out in California. So it's
been good here. I feel sorry for those folks, especially the air quality, because we did get a little bit of that come our way yesterday. In particular, it was hazy and it was tough. You spend a lot of time trying to worry about all the controllable factors for your health. The next thing you know, you step outside and you take a big whiff of smoke-filled air, and you start to get concerned about what kind of long-term effects that might have.
Right. And I'm amazed because I have some friends who live in Oklahoma, and one of them took a picture of the moon, and it's orange, and they said it's caused from those fires from California. And I was like, all the way to Oklahoma. Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you're much closer in Oklahoma, so I'm sure that, the air quality is definitely affected where you live. So
yeah,
so maybe those masks are a good thing to wear right now.
Yeah.
In particular.
Some use for them.
The reason I wanted to have you on the show is because you are definitely one of the leading experts when it comes to lifting and exercise and nutrition and diet. You've written for probably all the major magazines like Flex and Iron Man and all the rest of the magazines that are out there. You've been in this in the bodybuilding and powerlifting world for a long time, and you probably do it as good as anybody, if not better. To be at your age and to be as ripped and as huge as you are, just shows that what you've been doing is successful. And not only that, but you're also are you still training Thor and Brian Shaw?
I still work with Thor. Brian Shaw is he got sponsored by Trifecta, and I have a competing meal prep company. So I'm not able to work with him anymore. But the thing about doing nutrition counseling is that once you get yourself on track, it's just a matter of being consistent with it long term. There's not much you can do beyond that initial education piece. After that, it's more about compliance. And a lot of what I did with Thor and with Shaw and with other athletes was really to help them with the logistics, making sure they had what they needed when they needed it. That's why you saw me doing grocery shopping trips at Costco for the guys when I went to the World's Strongest Man or the Arnold. And it's really just about, I posted today, it's about execution. And the information is pretty simple. It's pretty basic. It's not rocket science. But a lot of folks, they just fail to execute consistently over a long period of time. And that's kind of what I'm here for, really, is just to wag my finger, be your mom, check up on you, make sure you're getting the results you want, and then asking the pertinent questions. How's your sleep? How's your digestion? How's your blood test numbers, just to see if you're getting the benefits that you need from the diet. So that's, the nuts and bolts of what I do on an ongoing basis, really, is just to kind of help keep people in line.
Well, and I think it's important that everybody realize that, like I said, you've been doing this for a very long time, but you've trained with the who's who in the bodybuilding powerlifting world. I mean, you've trained with Flex Wheeler, you've trained with Charles Glass, who's known as the trainer to the stars. You've trained with Mark Bell, which, by the way, you have to tell me why he's called Smelly. Is he really?
That was before my time. So, yeah.
And you've even trained with legendary powerlifter Ed Cohen, which is, absolutely amazing. So, and now you're training legends as well, like, Brian Shaw and Thor. And I know that you even trained you trained an MMA fighter as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I work with UFC fighters, CrossFit national champions. I even work with, um, ballet dancer for the Sacramento Ballet Company. So it's not all about, bulking necessarily. We work with dieters, and that's actually a small portion of what we do. We've got, the bulk of the majority of our clients worldwide are just weight loss folks, dad bods and soccer moms that are looking to feel better and improve their body composition, their general health, their sleep, their digestion, all of those things. And so I kind of enjoy that more. It's harder. The athletes are the easiest people to work with. They're more disciplined. They're more consistent. They do what you tell them to do if they trust you. So the more difficult challenge is to keep those folks that have a high recidivism. 95% of people who lose weight put it back on within 3 years. And that's the group that I'm trying to spend more of my time and effort on to see if I can, solve some of that long-term compliance issue. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's something that, having done this for a long time myself, the clients I found that took off the weight and could keep it off. I have a couple of clients who were over 100 pounds overweight and kept it off. That it was all about changing that mindset and realizing they were going to have to change their friends, that you can't hang out with the friends who want to go out and eat all the time and drink all the time, because and you have different interests now, and they're not going to want to do what you're doing. And if you want to stay active, your circle of friends are one of those things that has to change.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I said that in my obesity rant I did some 4 years ago, my Rhinos rant, where I talked about the problem with the obesity epidemic in Samoa in great detail.
Yeah,
My wife being Samoan, I've been to the island numerous times. I've spoken to many of the high schools and people there. And really, it's about changing behavior, and as you just said, and creating good habits, and just trying to make sure that it's a lifestyle, not just a means to an end. And that's what we try and design here, is something that fits their preference, rather than giving them a specific plan that is inconsistent with their own preferences and habits. So we do have to do some customization. It'd be nice if there was a one size fits all. That would be an easier business model. But in fact, you just got to get a lot of feedback from your clients. I more recently wrote a book called My Vertical Trainer, where we talk about the fact that it's personal training. It's called personal training for a reason. And the idea of training people from your boat, or even online training, which I do a lot of, it's less intimate, it's less frequent. I think it's less effective. And from my personal experience in working with clients, when you touch that client consistently, week after week, this idea that you can just help somebody reach a particular finish line the recidivism is just far too high. You have to build relationships with these people and set up some sort of consistent, ongoing support, whether it's they come and visit you once or twice or 3 times a week at the gym if you're a personal trainer, or just some sort of way that you can check up on them. I get all my clients to do daily checklists and send them to me on a daily basis. They send me their hours of sleep, their morning weight, pictures of each meal that they consume, at least until such time that we feel like this is easy for them and it's something that they can, a lifestyle they can consistently stick to. And then, the occasional, weekend dinner with family at a restaurant is an infrequent occurrence, or the binge, they get a meal here or there, a treat that they enjoy, becomes an infrequent occurrence, because it's just so much harder for people to stick with their diet long term if they're hungry or tired, or so we just try and manage those things, I think, that are most important for long-term compliance.
So you have your own personal training business there in Vegas, and then on top of that, you do online personal training, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, correct. I haven't been able to do a lot of the personal training because my travel schedule is so busy. I
Right.
just spent 2 months on the road. You may have seen that I did a 60 cities in 60 days USA tour where I visited all 48 states plus Washington, D.C. in 60 days. And I did a seminar every single night at a different location, a gym or a CrossFit box, or even some of them were at hotel conference rooms. And we had over 4,000 people attend nationwide. It was
Wow.
between June 15th and August 15th, just earlier this summer. And it kind of puts me on the road a lot. I've probably been in 10 countries and of course 50 states now since the tour over the last 2.5 years, traveling almost every weekend, flying to present on dieting primarily, and sometimes we'll do lifting tutorials as well, depending on the nature of the seminar. But it's really about getting that message across. Of course, I use the vertical diet as a template, but I'm quick to say, as you can see on my T-shirt, what's the best diet? It's the one you'll follow. And I designed my diet first and foremost for compliance, and I make sure that clients are aware that there's no magic diet, whether it's keto or paleo or vertical or intermittent fasting or vegan or carnivore. I'm quick to say that those are all just paths, and there's many paths to the same destination. I just try to find the one that works for them.
Well, we're gonna get into that in just a little bit, because that's the main focus of what I want to talk about, and get your thoughts on several of those diets that you just talked about, uh,
Sure.
from different aspects. Because again, everyone who, like you said, it it's specialized for each person, because some people are going to want it just strictly to lose weight, others are going to want it for performance, and others are going to because they want to bulk, or they want to get stronger and bigger, but they want to lean down at the same time. So, or lean up. So they want to be lean and bigger. And so, depending on, and of course every individual is different as well. So that's gonna vary, a little bit here and there as far as the amounts of food and things of that nature. Um, what I wanted to, um, ask you, and the reason I wanted to have you on here is because I think people are so confused. And I know they were confused even back in the day before we had the internet, when they would read different magazines, and guys would start, like Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazine were famous for this, and I'm sure the other magazines did it as well, where they would put a bodybuilder on there, like whoever won the Mr. Olympia, and they would put his diet on there. And so people would read that and go, "Oh, well, this is what I have to eat." And it's like, no, you're not, you're not even coming close to burning those kind of calories to eat what this man is what he's eating and doing the workout in order for him to eat like that. So with that, and now with the internet, there's so much misinformation out there. I really wanted to have someone who's an expert to talk about, what that looks like for people, and give them some common sense that comes with it. And again, the proof that you did, 60 cities in 60 days, I know that these people want you because you're the man. So I figured you're the best. Go to the best to get the information.
Yeah, there's a lot of variability with diets. Obviously, it's hard to hit the entire audience at once. So we'll talk about two extremes. We'll talk about calorie deficits to lose weight. That is, in fact, an imperative. You do need to be consuming fewer calories than you burn in order to lose weight. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to count calories,
Right.
but in fact, you do need to be in a deficit. Usually what I'll do is I'll start by letting clients know that that the diet portion is the most important. You hear a lot of people say move more, eat less, and I've said that myself. It's truthful, not useful necessarily. The idea that people think they can burn calories by running around doing excessive workouts can actually be counterproductive. It's great for health, but it doesn't necessarily add up to more fat loss. And there's been plenty of research to suggest that a lot of people who train too hard, particularly while they're dieting, end up getting tired. They'll go home and sit more and they'll eat more. And you can eat a lot more calories than you can burn. And so we start first and foremost in the kitchen. I like to throw percentages around, but there's certainly some variabilities, but I think certainly better than 90% of weight loss has to do with how much you eat, first and foremost. And so I focus on the diet first, what goes on in the kitchen. There's some strategies that people use to maintain a calorie deficit. Some people will weigh and measure their food. Other people will eat foods that are highly satiating, maybe eliminate a food group, like the folks that do keto dieting will eliminate carbohydrates, and just, by the fact that they eliminate an entire food group, they end up consuming less food. Intermittent fasting folks can create a calorie deficit just by eliminating a meal. But there's nothing magic about those strategies. The reason people fail on diets is because they get hungry and they get tired. And if you lack energy or if you're hungry, you're going to eat more food, whether it's binging or snacking or just larger meal portions. I talked about one reason just now, which we call compensation. You go out and try and train really, really hard. You go to the gym and do a massive CrossFit workout or something, and then you come home and you're exhausted and you sit on the couch and you eat more because you're hungry and you're tired. So really, when I start a diet, I focus first and foremost on food. I like to calculate calories. You can use an equation, a calorie calculator off of the internet. There's many of them, and you can type in your height and weight and your workload and come up with a number. And these numbers are just estimates. There's no magic to them, and everybody's different. But you need to start somewhere. We know from the Weight Control Registry, who's studied over 10,000 participants for many years now, that the most successful dieters, I think they've had over 10,000 dieters lose over 60 pounds and keep it off for 5 years. The very first thing on the list is that 98% of them went on a diet. And so a plan is better than no plan. The idea that you can just willy-nilly wing it is not going to happen. You're going to need to have some sort of determination to go on a diet. A keto diet is a diet. Even if you're not counting calories, it's still a diet. It's the food that you're eating. It's a strategy that you're using to mitigate hunger. And it works for some people. It doesn't work for everyone. And intermittent fasting is a diet. You eliminate a meal. As mentioned, you'll reduce calories. So that's a strategy that you may employ. You may do both. Counting calories or weighing and tracking your food is a diet. The most successful dieters have a plan, and they meal prep. That's the number one behavior for compliance. You see that in the bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini industry. The reason why they're so successful at dieting, one of the main reasons, is they all meal prep. The vast majority of them, you see them with their Tupperwares and their pre-portioned packaged foods in the refrigerator. They meal prep. They know exactly how much they're eating and when. They set up a time schedule, and that can be monotonous for some, but it is very, very effective. What I try and do is create a way that people can meal prep and make it a little easier to comply. Maybe once a week or twice a week, you prep meals for 3 days, or you use what I recommend is people take a thermos with them when they leave the house that has a hot meal in it. I travel all over the world, and I do it quite easily. I mentioned I just traveled to all 50 states over 60 days. I took thermos with me. I had prep meals dropped to me once a week at a gym or a hotel I was staying at. And I drove an RV that had a fridge and freezer and a microwave. When I fly places, I stay at hotels with a microwave and a refrigerator. And I take a couple of thermos to get me from home to my destination. And I take some frozen meals packed in my bag that I can eat while I'm there. I rarely need to, nor do I want to, go to the airport or room service or restaurants. Generally speaking, the foods kind of bother my stomach. I've always had digestion issues, particularly with seed oils, and everything at those restaurants is cooked in seed oils. And so that's always caused me distress. And most of my customers, whether it's athletes or just dad bods and soccer moms, present with some sort of digestive distress, and diarrhea or constipation or gas or bloating, or even Crohn's, IBS, IBD. I get the vast majority of people I deal with that are dieting have some one or more of those types of symptoms. GERD, acid reflux, autoimmune disorders, very, very common. And that's because they're just kind of randomly eating such a large variety of foods from so many different sources, be it restaurants or airports or room service and stuff like that, that I don't think that they've been able to identify the trigger. And so one of the first things I do with clients is get them to meal prep, make their own food at home, and then it's a whole lot easier for them to control what goes into their food, and then to identify any symptoms, any digestive distress that comes from that, and then to package those meals, whether it be in Tupperware or a thermos, and take them with them throughout the day. So I do focus on some sort of having some sort of plan and tracking what you consume. And then, if you're not losing weight, then you consume a little bit less. And that can mean if you're weighing your food and you're eating, 6 ounces of meat and 1 cup of carbs per meal, then you go to 5 ounces of meat and 3/4 of a cup of carbs per meal. It could be something as simple as that. It's the most accurate way, and it's the most easy to manipulate over time. And I just use a simple, initially, I'll do the 10-minute walks that we can go into in greater detail, but I don't prescribe an excessive amount of cardio. I just mentioned it's not terribly effective in terms of fat loss. More exercise does not equal more fat loss. It's not very sustainable to assign someone 40 minutes of treadmill at the gym. It's not enjoyable, and so it's not something you're really going to be planning for. It's something you do begrudgingly because you think it's an obligation to lose weight. You think it's required, and it's not. It's the first thing that you're going to sacrifice if you're a busy parent and you got to pick the kids up from school and take them to a team practice or something. You're just not going to make it to the gym. Even if you got 1 hour short of sleep the night before and you're a little tired, you're going to skip that. And so I don't assign that. I do 10-minute walks after each meal. It's very easy to comply with no matter where you're at. I've been doing them for 10 years now, even at airports or hotels. Really simple to comply with. And then, on an ongoing basis, I'm just focused on trying to maintain compliance, but not making people feel as though it's so terribly rigid. You can include some of the foods you enjoy. You just have to watch portion control. You can eat a large variety of foods so long as they don't have an adverse impact on your digestion. I do like to see people use whole foods, micronutrient dense foods, in order to help with energy and satiety. And I have a few tips and tricks there that I help people with depending on their goals. So that's, kind of a hodgepodge way of a general way of talking about how I'm successful in getting dieters to at least start on a plan that they can be consistent on and realize some results from that. And hopefully it's a lifestyle that they can stick with.
So if somebody wants to hire you as a person, they go, look, Stan, I really want your help because I think you're the guy to help me get to where I want to be. How could they do that? Now, again, like you said, you have an extremely busy schedule. You're on the road a lot. So is this something where they could maybe get some online training with you?
Yeah, my clients will just go to stanefferding.com and sign up for online training or online nutrition. They're both in the package. One thing that I've done is I've made the Vertical Diet and Peak Performance 3.0 ebook. I use this with all of my clients. I gave it to Hofthor, I gave it to Shaw and Larry Wheels and Dan Green. I give it to all of my clients. And we've had over 100,000 people worldwide, unique users of the Access the Diet program online. It's a username password access, and so we can see from where it's accessed. And it's the compilation of everything I've learned over 30 years. I know when you get a client, you don't want to have to repeat yourself. So the things that are consistent: sleep, hydration, nutrition, digestion, blood testing, exercise, of course, all the tips and tricks that I mentioned in terms of compliance, all of those things. I created an ebook, a very easy to follow ebook with a quick start guide, so you can do your BMR calculation, get your macros. It's got an appendix with diets that go from 1,250 calories up to 5,000 calories a day, depending on where your calories fall in. Grocery shopping list, everything that you need to get started. And it's I started accumulating this information many years ago. I've been using it with my clients for over 10 years. Just every question anybody ever asked me that was, I think, commonly, needed to know, I put into this ebook. I just kept adding to it and creating new chapters and answering new questions. And so when somebody hires me, I send them a copy of the ebook along with a detailed questionnaire about their personal needs and goals and medical conditions and preferences, just a whole host of questions, what they're currently eating, how they're training, body composition, all of those things. So, and then I use that questionnaire, I kind of bump that up against the ebook to customize the program for them. That's the easy part. I mean, that information is pretty simple. I should say it's simple, not easy. The information's simple. Compliance is hard. And so then, as I mentioned, when a client starts, I have them start to send me, use a daily checklist. I created an app for this that may help some people, but I just used a piece of paper for decades. It's like the same way Dorian wrote down every single set and rep of every exercise that he ever did. I wrote down my hours of sleep and my body weight. I write down things like whether or not I'm taking like vitamin D3 or magnesium, when I'm training, my 10-minute walks. I just have a checklist, and I check those things off every single day. The repetitive behaviors that are necessary, I think, long-term to be successful. The things that matter the most. Sleep obviously is a huge one. Training, 10-minute walks, meals that I eat, all of that I put in there. And now it's to the point where I just check off the number of meals I eat a day, not necessarily the details on every single meal and what the constitution is, because I tend to eat the same thing pretty consistently. So I ask my clients to use a checklist like that, and then send me that information daily along with pictures of their meals initially, as mentioned. And it's more for their benefit than mine. There's not a lot of things I need to do unless, if they go a couple of weeks and their goal is to lose weight and they haven't, then we may need to make an adjustment to calories or discuss compliance. If they haven't done their 10-minute walks, then it's an easy, direction for me to get them to try and comply with those more in order to, realize the goals they want. If their sleep's consistently at 5 hours, I can emphasize the importance of that. If you don't track it and you don't see it, then it's kind of really hard to recognize, that you're deficient in that area. That which gets measured gets improved. And so I really focus on making sure, and that's probably, in terms of a hierarchy, the most important thing. And I got to hammer down and find out, hey, why aren't you getting enough sleep? Have you allowed yourself enough time, or are you just burning the candle at both ends? Are you, avoiding blue light at night, trying to get out of your phone? Or is this a thing where you go to sleep on time, but you can't fall asleep, or you wake up? Then I got to look at circadian rhythms. I got to look at the environments that they're in. Good sleep hygiene is in the book. Dark room, quiet room, cool room. I pay attention to all those details, because if you can't fix the most important stuff, then you're really just going to be chasing your tail. People try and throw in more cardio, or they'll think that there's some, fat burner they can take that's going to solve that problem, and that isn't the case. So That's what I do when I work with a client. I don't think it's rocket science. It's more about just getting them to pay attention to all the things that will make them successful, the little, what they might consider to be the little things, and get them to put, place more of a priority on those and to track them consistently. And I've always said it's never any one thing. It's always, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's focusing on all those little things on the checklist. And that's really what has been the key to my success. I talked about this, in respect to the businesses that I've been successful in and in the sports that I've competed in and with the clients that I've worked with, is the things I do outside the gym. A lot of people will put a lot of energy into their training session and not as much priority on all those little things that I just mentioned that are outside the gym that make that training, that exercise bout more enjoyable and more productive.
Yeah, you said something a few years ago, and that I agree with you. You said you don't grow in the gym, and I don't.
No, yeah. I wrote an article, I think it was over 10 years ago for NPC News, called "You Don't Grow in the Gym." The training for me was always the fun part. It was the easy part. That's why I did what I did, because I love to lift so much.
Right.
And the reason I love to lift is because I came to the gym prepared. I slept well, I ate well, I was hydrated. And so every lifting session was euphoric for me. I was throwing around massive amounts of weight, and I could train for, a long, long time. When I was a younger man, I would easily train for hour and a half plus, Nowadays I'm cautious with that. So yeah, and I talked to a lot about that to high school kids in particular, because that was my thought when I was in college, is that the more weights I lifted, the more I would grow. And that's really completely backwards. All you do in the gym is break down muscle tissue. Same would be true if you're an athlete playing sports. All you do is break down muscle tissue. So you have to be really, really diligent about building that back up. I'll say this, in a calorie deficit, it becomes even more important not to do too much training because it can be very hard. Now, some beginners they're relatively sedentary and have a high level of body fat can recomp pretty well. They can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. But that's for a very brief, kind of what we call the honeymoon period. And for anybody with any, reasonable history of lifting or who doesn't carry, a significant amount of excess body fat, it's really hard to gain muscle while losing fat in a calorie deficit. You're not terribly anabolic in that environment. So I focus on retaining lean mass, which is much easier than gaining muscle. You can lift with less frequency and volume and intensity. I don't want to say intensity, but certainly less frequency and in volume. It's probably recommended. It's ideal in a calorie deficit for most people to use the kind of stimulus that retains lean muscle mass without an excessive effort. Because then again, we're back to compensation. You're not going to repair that muscle as easily as you would in a surplus, and you're going to get tired and hungry. And so I'm really cautious about the recommendations I make, because I know people are gung ho. They want to go on a diet and they want to start crushing the weights and they want to do everything at once, and it can actually be counterproductive, and you burn out and you get exhausted and start eating too much food. So I actually, when I implement a calorie deficit, it kind of depends on, the individual, their level of training and their level of body fat. I try and encourage them to use weight training as a lean body tissue maintenance. And that would be, say, a strength training program. You might just go in and do a couple sets of 5 on a heavy trap bar deadlift, and maybe a couple sets of weighted chin-ups. I'm talking about fewer sets, less frequency and volume, and probably more weight, more of a powerlifting type program. Just go in and lift some really heavy weights. I do this with UFC fighters, obviously, because I want a good strength to weight ratio and I don't want to put muscle on them. I do it with this new military converts program we started for Army recruits. These are people who are trying to get into the military but can't make weight or are overweight. They have a height and weight and a body fat percentage requirement to get into the military. And so we approached the U.S. Army recruiting group and asked them to send us their overweight recruits. And that's the exact recommendation I make to them. If you go to the gym and start crushing weights, one, you're going to get hungry and tired. Two, you're not going to recover as well, but it might be counterproductive to your scale goal. We want to hold on to your lean body mass, but crushing weights, but adding extra muscle, which will then hold more glycogen, which will then hold more water, is not very conducive to making weight, And so, we implement a strength training program. We might have them go in just do triples, a little trap bar, 2 sets of a trap bar deadlift pull twice a week at 90% of your 1 rep max. Pretty good at holding on to muscle tissue without overexerting yourself. And then we can focus on where where fat loss really occurs, and that's in controlling your appetite. And so we just do the 10-minute walks, and we, try and get a calorie deficit that they can comply with. And they really enjoy the program because they had convinced themselves that just the opposite was true. They had to go out and, run 5 miles a day, and they were just constantly beaten up and exhausted. And, it's really hard to perform that kind of workload without adequate calories to recover. And then you're just voraciously hungry all the time. And that's the biggest thing we have to control with folks is their hunger. A couple other strategies that we use for hunger. I'll use, say, steak. I'm a big fan of red meat because it's high in iron and B12 and zinc, and it fills you up more. Obviously, more protein, higher satiation, a higher thermic effect of food, meaning you can eat more of it and net out fewer calories. Protein in general does that, but steak tends to keep you full longer. And just the mechanical process of cooking it, cutting it, chewing it, kind of delays the amount of time that it takes to eat, which of course has that before that signal is released for satiety. There's a bit of a time component to that, not just volume.
Let me ask you a question, because I can guarantee you people out there are going to say, they've been told that red meat is bad for you. It raises your cholesterol levels and all that, all that stuff that, they've been taught for decades now. So if you would, can you clear the air just a little bit? Just say, look, you could even say, yeah, it's all BS or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. I mean, that could be an hour-long conversation with red meat. Obviously, it's been demonized primarily by vegan interests, have demonized red meat. It's not bad for you by any stretch of the imagination. They've demonized cholesterol for the longest time, and now, of course, the dietary guidelines don't even look at cholesterol as having a limiting, as needing to be limited. Saturated fats, over 50% of red meat is monounsaturated fat. It is highly satiating. It's hard to overconsume a lean protein, to be honest. We're not talking about adding cubes of butter, or straight cream to the diet. Even the keto diets now are higher protein keto.
Are they?
They're not the Atkins keto that we once saw. People are getting a little more sensible about the fact that there needs to be some bit of reason, and the protein being more satiating and better for retention of lean body mass is kind of where.
It used to be like 80% fat, and that was one of the things, is that you didn't gain muscle on that keto diet because there was not enough protein in there to.
Yeah, and again, if you, this is important to recognize that 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of the diet. And we've seen this, and in my obesity rant, I talked about the fact that when you're on the McDonald's diet, they had a professor in his classroom. They put him on an 1,850 calorie diet. They measured carefully all of his food, but it was all from McDonald's. It was Big Macs, and it was fries, and it was, even apple pies and ice cream. but he only ate 1,850 calories a day, and he walked, I think, 30 or 40 minutes a day. And he lost like 30 pounds, and his blood sugars improved, his blood pressure improved, his cholesterol improved, all of his health markers improved when he lost weight. So it's important to note that that's the reason I say, what's the best diet? The one you'll follow, because weight loss itself is the primary driver of improved health outcomes. Having said that, I wouldn't recommend McDonald's diet because it wouldn't satiate you, and it might be micronutrient deficient because there's a lot of processed food in there. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the types of foods that cause digestive distress. I'm a low FODMAP guy. I like to lead with a diet that is low in fermentable oligo and monosaccharides. It's been well proven that that is a diet that's very effective for people. I don't want to call it a diet, but there are foods that are more likely to give you digestive distress and less likely to give you digestive distress. And, the studies done on the low FODMAP diet show that about 60 to 80% of people who begin that diet realize a relief of those symptoms. And so it's not a good food, bad food conversation. It's just a matter of some people have difficulty digesting certain too many grains, legumes that aren't cooked, too many and that aren't cooked well enough, sugar, alcohols, even legumes for some people are really hard. You get a lot of, beans, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot. Or is it musical fruit? So I kind of veered off there because I wanted to be cautious to say that I don't call them restrictions, but I do offer some recommendations to people that might help them be more successful. And eating foods that feel good on your stomach. I say I don't eat foods I like. I eat foods that like me, and I make that decision about an hour after I eat. If you find yourself having trouble with a lot of gas and bloating and digestion and issues and diarrhea and constipation, there are some recommendations that can be made in an elimination diet, the low FODMAP diet being the most studied of those, can be beneficial for some people to make them feel better, give them more energy. They have less brain fog and those kinds of things, general malaise and that can happen from consuming foods that you don't digest very well. So that kind of will transition back into we talked about red meat there. Most of the research on red meat are highly confounded epidemiological studies where they look at populations of people using very inaccurate food frequency questionnaires. And then they're not controlled very well for whether or not the persons that are eating meat are also eating the fries and the buns and the soda pop with them. We have also what's called the healthy user bias. In those studies, it appears that people who eat more meat, red meat, also weigh more, drink more, smoke more, and exercise less. And so is the red meat causing the very minimal increase in potential long-term health outcomes, or is it all of those other conditions? And the people who tend to eat more vegetables tend to be more affluent, better educated, smoke less, drink less, weigh less, and exercise more. So it's a decision that those types of individuals make that might be consistent with the current nutrition dogma, as it were. The highest consumers of red meat in the world is Hong Kong. They have the longest lifespan. Australia consumes more red meat than we do. They have a longer lifespan than we do. There's many what you might call paradoxes that exist. The highest consumers of saturated fat, France, Switzerland right behind them, two of the lowest in cardiovascular disease. So there's lots and lots of these types of examples that exist. The IARC, which is the research arm for the World Health Organization that classified red meat and processed red meat as carcinogenic, they're largely publishing vegans, and they used only epidemiology, no randomized controlled trials to do that research. The bias goes on and on and on. And so, again, we could spend another hour on this. Nina Teicholz wrote an entire book, The Big Fat Surprise, and has a great video on YouTube where she goes over all the research in detail. She's an excellent source that's been vetted very, very well for many years now and shown to have done an excellent job of compiling that research. So I generally will just copy and paste her video for people who are interested. She goes over it in much greater detail and has all of the research to support it. But that's my general conversation. And my diet isn't a carnivore diet. I don't recommend people eat exclusively red meat. I utilize it as one of a number of protein sources that has some very beneficial micronutrients, particularly for women. Women who diet, very commonly, particularly those who exercise, end up with the female triad. One of that is anemia, low iron. Women, because of the monthly period, will lose more iron than men, and they eat fewer calories, and so they're more susceptible to anemia. Red meat is one of the highest foods that you can consume in heme iron, which is the most bioavailable source of iron. So I don't exclude red meat from any diet, particularly for women. It is much more satiating than eating chicken if you just try both. If you eat 6 ounces of boneless, skinless chicken breast and 6 ounces of top sirloin steak, you'll stay fuller longer on top sirloin steak, and it's got 3 times the iron, 6 times the B12, 9 times the zinc. And I'm concerned about those things when people start dieting and they go into a calorie deficit. It becomes more and more important that the foods that they eat are more micronutrient dense. Otherwise, they start to experience those deficiencies. Women will generally eat just the egg white. You commonly see this in guru diets. Well, they're high in avidin. And avidin protein binds to biotin. And biotin is good for skin, hair, and nails. So you see people on these egg white, tilapia, and broccoli diets. Next thing you know, their hair starts to dry out because they don't have the biotin from the egg yolk. And they also will end up, if they don't get an adequate iodine source, and their thyroid function starts to slow down, get hypothyroidism, that dry hair starts falling out. I see that commonly in women. Another couple of things on the female triad is amenorrhea, the cessation of the menstrual period. And that's not just weight related, it's micronutrient related. And so you can postpone how soon on any diet at some point, and it's different for different women, the menstrual period will cease. And it kind of depends on how lean you are. We see this a lot with runners. I've been working with track athletes since the early 90s at the University of Oregon. Female runners in particular will experience that the amenorrhea, the cessation of the menstrual period. And that can have hormonal effects that are far-reaching. And so it is something to be cautious of. We see it often in the bikini industry and figure and that because they get so lean. The last of the female triad is osteoporosis. And again, I see that in runners. They're more susceptible to shin splints. And calcium is very important, and it's not just for bone health. It's for nerve signaling. It's for muscle contraction. Calcium triggers the excitation to relaxation cycle for muscle contraction. So it becomes important for performance as well. We talked about how being tired is part of the reason that you go off your diet. You're just not able to go to the gym and exercise very well on a calorie deficit with low iron, hypothyroidism, lack of calcium. Just imagine what it's like to go into the gym and try and actually hold on to lean body mass by getting an adequate stimulus when you're feeling like that. And so it's very common. One of the things that is very prevalent in the professional dieting industry amongst bikini girls and figure and physique girls is they start to use supplements and medications to stave off some of those symptoms. They might start taking thyroid. They might start taking Anavar, which is an anabolic steroid that helps them hold on to their lean body mass when they're in those calorie deficits. They might start taking stimulants like clenbuterol, another central nervous system stimulator that helps keep their metabolism up and burn calories. So your soccer mom who sees these bikini girls in the best shape of their life on stage in their bikini thinks that, as you mentioned, they see their diet and then they try and follow it. They experience all the negative side effects. They lose their muscle. They're exhausted because they don't have steroids. They're exhausted because they don't have clenbuterol, and they're trying to drink as much coffee as they can. It's not anywhere near as effective as central nervous stimulator drugs like clenbuterol. Their hair's drying out and falling out, and they're exhausted from hypothyroidism because they're not taking thyroid medication, or they end up going to the doctor and getting a prescription for thyroid medication because they've created this hypothyroidism for themselves by trying to follow these nutrition programs. So the list goes on and on. A lot of those gurus will tell you not to salt your food, which is an absolutely horrendous idea. People start getting lightheaded and dizzy and don't recover from workouts. Their energy fails. Their cravings go through the roof. They tell them not to eat fruit, which is just stupid. It's a really micronutrient dense food. It can be highly satiating. The list goes on, but I'm very cautious not to implement those kind of over-restrictive diets. Also, a lot of they tell them to eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and asparagus. And those can actually impede iodine absorption, which is important for thyroid function. So you have to be careful how much and how it's prepared, and whether or not you're getting adequate iodine to offset some of that inhibition. And so it's really a terrible, terrible diet. That's that guru bikini girl diet that's very common out there, that I probably just described what most people receive when they are given a diet by their guru trainer. Here's your egg whites, here's your tilapia, here's your broccoli, call me in a week. Let me know how you're doing.
So I'm glad you brought something up. First off, you said so much. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that one. So I'm going to drop these on you. But the first thing I wanted to say is that I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that many of these athletes use steroids, and that's never talked about in the magazines. It's never, it's very seldom talked about online. And so when they see these diets, when they see these workout programs, like, do you remember back in the, what was it, the 80s, the Bulgarian workout? And there was this,
of course, it's still going on.
It's this insane workout that I truly, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know of a human being who can follow that workout without dying. I mean, I was like, you've got to be doing steroids to be able to get through this workout. And I could be wrong, but I remember.
No, you're not. And it's made a resurgence. Certainly no natural athlete could accomplish that kind of volume and frequency and load. But what people don't understand about the Bulgarian system is that they'll bring in, they recruit like they would in Russia and China, hundreds or even thousands of athletes who have a predisposition, a genetic predisposition. They'll look at their family history and height and weight and bone density and try and recruit them for specific sports that they might be more predispositioned to be successful in. Then they crush those athletes, and only those with an extraordinary recovery level, a central nervous system that's just, fantastic, can survive the program to begin with. It might be 5% of the athletes. All the rest drop like flies. Right. And we see this in studies like Brad Schoenfeld runs on hypertrophy training, where those people who train in the heavy 5-rep range have a much higher dropout rate and express much more fatigue at the end of the training program. And that's comparing, 90% loads for 5 reps or 85% loads for 5 reps to 70% loads for 10 to 12 reps to, 60 or 50% loads for 20 reps. When you compare those 3 groups, the 5s and the 20s drop out at a much greater rate. The 5s more than anybody. And so you have to be cautious how much loading, how much frequency, volume, and intensity that you impose on yourself to get the same level of results. And that's with respect to hypertrophy. You do get a greater strength response from the 5s, but you got to be much more cautious about, deloading and recovery. And then, what's your level of fitness to be able to handle that load? It might be something you need to gradually train into over the course of many months or even years, that your body can adapt to recover from that kind of loading protocol.
I'm sure you've experienced this too. Now that you're older, is like one of the things I've experienced is like I can pretty much do what I did when I was younger. I just do it less. Like I need more recovery time than I used to need, and I don't do it as frequently as I used to do it. Is that what you find as well?
Exactly. I rarely train over an hour. I usually do I train every body part twice every 8 days now, or I used to train them twice every 6. I just do a 6 on, 1 off. But I train with a little less. I don't train as heavy because it's harder to recover from, and I got to watch how many of my total sets have the level of intensity that I used to train at. I might only be able to throw in like 2 really hard sets for the workout, and the rest would probably be more for just volumizing and the like.
All right. So you just said that you don't do as heavy. Listen, I've seen some of your videos and you're not telling me. I was like, holy crap, I cannot believe you.
Not as heavy. When you used to squat 800 or 900, 6 seems not as heavy.
You got a point there. I guess that's true.
Yeah. And I get, people they'll get on social media and say, Stan, you're setting a bad example. People are going to hurt themselves. I'm like, well, that's 60% of my peak at one point. Do 60% of your peak and you'll be just fine. Don't try and do what I do.
And speaking of which, I didn't know that you trained Larry Wheels either. And I was like, what are you doing training him? You don't want him to come because he's a young kid and he's strong.
Well, no, that's a great story because I started working with Larry years ago. He actually flew out here to Vegas and spent a couple of months with me and mostly went over the diet program, but went to Costco, same stuff, went grocery shopping, got a barbecue and started making Monster Mash and, just teaching them how to eat more calories easily. I know we talked a lot about weight loss today, but I also work with a lot of people who are interested in gaining weight and gaining muscle. And it's not just, a free for all of eat whatever you want, whenever you want. That it's actually kind of hard to eat enough calories if you're taking in too much pizza, pasta, and pancakes. You end up getting, bloated and gassy, and it's just hard to consume those kinds of foods and to be able to digest them and function. Plus, you might add too much fat and end up with fatty liver and start having insulin resistance issues and partitioning nutrients towards fat instead of muscle. So those are all complications that I look at when I'm working with athletes that are bulking. But quick story on Larry, I was actually working with him in powerlifting, and he kept dieting down to the 242-pound class. I would help him do his cut and his refeed to compete at 242 when he set his world record there. And then one time he said he was getting ready for another powerlifting meet. And I said, well, why don't you quit trying to be the world's tallest midget and dieting down to 242 and eat yourself up to a real man's weight class and chase a real record. And I was talking about my own record, by the way. Right. And sure enough, that set a spark in him, and he bulked up, and he did compete, and he did beat my world record. Oh, probably just should have kept my mouth shut. Right. He's a phenom. Once in a generation, an individual comes along it just blows you away. The more and more people that are participating now in strength sports, you start to see the outliers popping up. The Amanda Lawrences of the world, a 22-year-old girl squatting 565, natural with no knee wraps. You just see some freaky people, deadlifting 1,000 pounds and things like that. There's some phenomenal athletes. I can hardly keep track of them now. Every day I open up Instagram, I'm like, who the hell is this guy? This 220-pound guy just, squat 800, deadlift over 800, and bench, damn near 5. It's just crazy what's going on now. But you see it's like a lot of sports. The more people that participate, right, the more uniquely genetically gifted individuals and hardworking people start to filter to the top. And it's like, wow, now there's just such a broad range in all the weight classes of great lifters. It's incredible.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think that's one of the pluses is that, over the decades, especially probably, I want to say starting in the 70s, it might've been from pumping iron even. It might've kind of got people going to the gym and working out. And you see in the 70s, then the 80s, then the 90s, more and more people going to the gym, more and more people working out. And you're right. The more people who participate, these outliers that may not have been discovered beforehand because they may not have, ever gotten into it. Now they're out there, and people like me, when back in the day, I was an anomaly. It's like you didn't see guys as big as me very often unless you went out to Venice, California, and then you'd see them everywhere. but you very seldom saw them just walking around in any city. Now I'm not even considered big compared to these guys that are out there today. They're just enormous.
No, you're right. It's humbling too. There's more people participating in this sport than ever before. Powerlifting, strongman, bodybuilding, figure physique, bikini. Go into any gym in the country, and it's packed with these phenomenal physiques. It used to be that it was rare to come across an IFBB pro, and now there's half a dozen in every gym in the country.
Right.
Which is, isn't necessarily a big deal anymore, to be honest with you, because it used to be so much harder to become a pro that by the time a Flex Wheeler or, a Kevin Levrone got their pro card, they were, right up there at the top 10 in the Olympia that very same year. It was just this huge group of people that were fighting year after year to get very few available. There used to be, one pro card at the USA's for the overall winner and one for each weight class at the Nationals. And that was it.
Right.
And I think it was a big deal when they offered one to the North American Championships. And then from there, it just started, every class, two every class, added classes. And so now it's not as big a deal as it used to be. Hell, I got my Masters, my pro card at the Masters, and before I stepped onto an IFBB pro stage. And so there's a lot more of those. But, irrespective of the credentials, there's some freaks out there, and you see them in CrossFit boxes too. These just incredible physiques that are, just have this level of fitness that's extraordinary. It's humbling. As I traveled around the country, I had the opportunity to see, endless physiques and bumped into a lot of the big names in the industry, of course, and just people that you've never heard of. That you're like, damn, who's that guy? And
right.
Nobody knows him, and he doesn't really have much of a social media presence, but you're like, Jesus, that dude's a freak, one way or another, whether he's just a massive squatter or a massive bencher, he's got these ridiculous legs or this huge upper body, and or he could just do phenomenal things, in the gym, whether it's weightlifting or even if it's some sort of athletic pursuit. I'm just blown away by how many fantastic athletes there are out there now. It's really incredible, and it can be a bit discouraging for people who get onto the internet. They go onto Instagram and they start sifting through Instagram, and they're like, Jesus, and they just don't feel like they'll ever be able to achieve that level, because they think it's common,
Right.
and all. While there is a lot more of them, it's still the vast majority of the country is overweight and obese and inactive. And I always think it's funny that a lot of these social media, particularly the personal trainers, we're always throwing stones at each other and trying to, knock down everybody else's program or plan or recommendation, this, that, and the other. And there's certainly plenty of that needs to be done. But there's, 250 million people out there who need some freaking help with their waistline. It's not like we're going to run out of clients. It's job security. So I just encourage people to spend a little less time in the fake world, the social media world, and a little more time just looking within a few miles of your own gym or your own house and start knocking on doors and handing out business cards and talking to folks. Everybody wants to change their life, improve their health, improve their sleep, improve their energy, all of those things. You'd be hard spent to find somebody that didn't want to do something with their health and fitness that you couldn't assist them with if you were so inclined and were a trainer in the business.
So I want to ask you a couple things. One is you're a very, very successful businessman. And for anyone who isn't aware of that, you were successful in business. You didn't make your money in bodybuilding.
No.
So and you've had several successful businesses, and I kind of want to ask you this question because there's this prevailing thought that there shouldn't be billionaires in the world. And I go, look, you don't understand why billionaires do what they do. It's the same reason why if you've never played a sport, you don't understand why athletes do what they do. You don't understand that when a coach is jumping down one of their athlete's throats, you sit there and you look at it as though it's a horrible scene. And that athlete understands, that coach understands, because they're part of that. And if you've never been part of it, it's hard for you to understand. Here you are, a man who's accomplished. You have nothing to prove. You've accomplished, I would imagine, probably pretty close to everything that any person could want to accomplish. You obviously could retire in luxury. And yet you have this drive. You came out with the all-in-one cooler, which I was going to say when when you were talking about, driving around with your drinks and stuff, I go, yeah, this is a good time to tell people about your all-in-one cooler that you were actually on Shark Tank with, and you got to deal with Damon, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay, so
And John at Shark Tank. Yeah, we partnered on the cooler. That was a fun experience. Yeah.
It was fun watching you on there and watching you do your feats of strength and watching these guys sit there watching you. It was very entertaining. So so you got that, you got the vertical diet, and you continue to push yourself. You continue to like do this podcast with me when you could sit back on a Sunday and go, yeah, I'm not doing anything today. What motivates you? Because I can't imagine it's the money, because you've got plenty of money. So, I want you to express to people who don't understand that mindset, what drives you every day to do more than what you've already done?
Well, I used to chase money. I spent many years working for owners of other companies in a management position. Ran a telecommunications company I was vice president of. I worked in the real estate development industry, managing multifamily apartment communities for multi-billion-dollar REITs. These are $100 million projects that I was running. I've had, dozens up to hundreds of employees that worked for me. And I was able to successfully make those businesses thrive, and the owners, experienced obviously a big return on their investment. And I thought I was, critical or key to that. So then I started my own companies. And it was mostly just, to build a successful business, to make money, to be successful. A telecommunications company, a real estate investment firm, where I, bought, built, and sold over $60 million in single family, multifamily, and commercial real estate. An engineering firm. And all of those ventures were really about building a successful business to make money. They weren't terribly enjoyable. That's the down part. I had over 100 employees in the call center that, you're working 7 days a week, from 7 to 7. A lot of HR hassles and legal hassles and computer hassles and all of those things. As anybody who's run a business knows, that it looks pretty nice from the outside when you drive a nice car and you live in a nice home, but it's a headache, and if it's not something you enjoy, it's even more of a headache. But can't complain. Did well, no question. The fitness industry was something that I'd always wanted to be in. That's why I studied exercise science in college. That's why I was a high school soccer coach. That's why I started working with the University of Oregon football players. I was a personal trainer. I worked at many gyms. I even owned a gym at one time. I always wanted to be in the fitness industry, but it's hard to make money in the industry. Or it was, I should say.
Right.
It's becoming easier and easier, the more people that need help. And the social media aspect of it just helps you market yourself a little better. And so, when the opportunity presents itself for me to utilize my social media presence to work in this industry, and then seeing the successes of close friends of mine, such as Mark Bell in particular, who's done very well in the industry. But he did it by providing a lot of great information. And so I kind of started there. I started putting out a lot of free content, as Mark did with his podcast, his magazine. Wasn't an earner. It was a lot of great information. Lots of podcasts and videos that I started shooting with him back in, the year, 2009, all those many years ago. And Mark just did a great job of it, better than damn near anyone. Being very prolific, putting out a lot of content on a regular basis. So I started putting out a ton of content and writing, and doing videos and podcasts and just giving out free information. And, started out doing a little online training, and I was doing some, personal training some years ago. And then as I started working with more and more popular athletes, people became more and more aware of me. And then I was able to publish and put out the Vertical Diet ebook, which was very successful. It went worldwide. It went viral, and we've got great response from it. And I just feel like the information that I put out is very helpful. I did a 2.5-hour seminar in Iceland with Hafthor at his gym that they put on YouTube. Hafthor's people up there. It's got over 6 million views now. And I go over in great detail almost every aspect of my diet program on a slideshow, step by step. And I remember my wife saying to me when I got home and they published it on the internet, she goes, nobody's going to buy your ebook. You just told them everything in your seminar and they put it on the internet for free. Just the opposite happened.
Really?
Thousands and thousands of people started buying my ebook because, and you know, you may be the same, but I'll watch a podcast sometimes, particularly one that's very informative. I find myself doing this all the time when I watch Peter Attia's stuff. I just can't remember all of it. Right. And so I have to I get pissed when I get done with a podcast that's so loaded with information. I actually have to sit down and rewatch it with a yellow pad of paper and start writing stuff down. And then I'll watch everything that person does. I did it with Dr. D. Nicolantonio's stuff. Obviously, I do it with Mike Israetel's stuff. I do it with Lane Norton's stuff. I watch all of these people. You said at the beginning of the when you introduced me that I was, I don't know, you said I was a brilliant whatever. Look, I'm not that smart, to be honest with you. I'm very persistent in trying to get the information that I need, and I boil it down into the kinds of applicable, implementable pieces that I can use, and then I share that with other people. I don't do the research. I'm not the Brad Schoenfeld or the Brett Contreras. I'm not doing the studies myself. In my book, I list all of these people. I go to their seminars. I've been to Brett Contreras' seminar. I've been to Barbell Medicine seminar with Austin Baraki and Jordan Fagenbaum. I've been to Alan Aragon's seminars. I've read Lane Norton's book. I've read RP Strength's book. I buy all of their stuff, even though I've seen all of their videos. I'm a voracious reader, and I watch their podcasts, and I read everything that they publish. And I highlight certain things. I take little clips out, and I include the videos and the links in my ebook. Things that I think are really important and really relevant. And I have to sift through hours and hours and hours of this to get 5 minutes of information. But I've been really fortunate that this industry's responded so well to the information I provided. But it started with the information. My rants take me days to prepare. That's why I don't do them. I research them. I write them. I rehearse them. I record them.
You do.
It can take me.
I was going to ask you because I've seen you do your Rhino's rant, and I've seen you also like when you were talking about Samoans, and that was when you were in your SUV.
Yeah.
And I was watching you, and I go, you don't stutter. Like you've got this thing down. You speak so succinctly without skipping a beat, and you never miss. And I was like, he's got to rehearse this because you don't. One of the things, like if I were to do that, I guarantee you that I'd sit back and go, oh, I forgot to say this, or I forgot to say that. You don't forget anything. You've got it down. And I go, you must be like an actor who rehearses and remembers his lines because you just give it so perfectly. And I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. Well, I spend a lot of time on them. It was like I've talked about my presentation on Shark Tank. I spent weeks and weeks, rehearsing that in my living room with my family, holding up pictures of the sharks in front of their faces. And so I do, here's my thing is I don't want to spend an hour watching a podcast for 5 minutes of information. I'm just too busy, And so I'm really picky about the stuff I watch. And so I thought, I'm not going to do that to people. I'm not just going to randomly turn on the camera and start blabbing about something and then not, like you said, you'll forget like 30% of the information, you just forget. And the rest of it you might repeat, and some of it you might not be specific enough. And And so, yeah, I wanted, when I did all of my rants, I wanted to make sure that I wrote them out longhand, piece by piece, and I would research and make sure the information I was giving was accurate. And that's not to say that I'm always right. There's certainly many things that I've at least softened my position on over the years, or made adjustments to. But as has everyone. I follow all of Greg Nuckols' stuff on Mass Research Review, which is an extraordinary resource. And after you start watching these people year after year, Lane Norton stuff, they'll start to change over the years. Mark Bell in his book on the war on carbs, he now eats carbs. Which is true of Mike Mutzel too. And I was on his show a couple of years ago arguing about carbs, or at least not arguing, but stating my case for carbs. And he now eats carbs around workouts. And the same is true with Paul Saladino, Carnivore MD. Yeah. Now eats carbs around workouts.
Oh, he's eating carbs too?
He's eating carbs too, and he's a smart guy. He's brilliant to listen to.
Have you noticed since he's become famous that somewhat famous, that he never does videos with his shirts on? It's like he's always wearing chest. I was like, because he's gotten in shape, obviously, and so he's always wanting to show off his body and say, look.
Yeah. And I think there's something to learn from everyone. I named a lot of names of people who probably don't agree with each other. And I don't agree with 100% of anything any of them produce. But that's not to say that there isn't a lot of great information that I can utilize and share with my customers that if it's valid and effective.
Right.
So I listen to a large variety of opinions. There are some people out there who are pretty dogmatic, who only do one thing. They'll recommend keto to 100% of the people. Stub your toe, keto. It doesn't matter. But I'm careful with people who just won't appreciate that not everybody's going to respond the same way that they do.
That's why I think I like Dr. Sean Baker so much, is because he's also a big carnivore. In fact, I think he might be the carnivore guy, even over Paul Saladino.
Yes, he is.
So, but he says, look, I'm not telling you to eat this way. He goes, I'm telling you what works for me. And if it works for you, give it a try. If it doesn't, you want to eat vegetables, eat vegetables. And so it's not so, like you said, dogmatic with him. It's, it's like, you need to do what works for you, which is what you've been saying this entire time. Because if you're not willing to stick with it, it's not going to work for you. It's that simple. So obviously, I'm not going to say, hey, which diet is better, the keto, the carnivore, or the vertical diet? I know the answer to that. So one of the questions I had about vertical diet, because I've done carnivore diet it's probably been around 6 months, maybe a little bit more. And the reason I did it is because I wanted to see how I felt on eating meat. And I pretty much stuck to just eating carnivore, except I will admit, I make a little shake at smoothie at night with another company that was on Shark Tank, Super Coffee. And I'm not even a coffee fan, but this stuff is really delicious. So I mix it in there. I put a little powdered peanut butter in there and a banana. So that banana is probably the only thing I have that's that's not carnivore. I have either steak and chicken or steak and shrimp every night. So and so I've really enjoyed it, and I have to admit that I do it with intermittent fasting. And again, not because I necessarily wanted to lose weight, but I wanted to see how it made me feel health-wise. And I think that's one of the things, as you had mentioned earlier, is that when we do a diet, we really need to consider our health and how it affects us health-wise, not just whether or not we lose weight. Because while losing fat will help you overall, usually help you overall, your overall health, if you eat the wrong foods, like you were talking about the McDonald diet, and I was thinking, yes, you can lose weight. I couldn't believe that you said their sugar levels had gotten better, and I was like,
yeah,
with McDonald's, and he must not be drinking shakes or eating their their apple pie or anything.
Yeah, he was eating ice cream. Yeah, weight loss will improve blood sugars. It'll improve
Wow.
your HA1C. It'll improve your fasted glucose. It'll improve your fasted insulin. Weight loss itself. Matter of fact, a 7 to 10% weight loss will resolve 95% of fatty liver as measured with biopsy. And that doesn't mean that, and that's including, like if you're 300 pounds and get down to 270, you can resolve 95% of your fatty liver, which dramatically improves all of your metabolic health. This is why I specifically periodize my strength, my big athletes' body weight. You've seen numerous times over the last 4 years that I've been working with Hafthor that he's dropped weight in the off season. He'll come down from 430, 440, 450 into the 390s or 380s. We've done that every year like clockwork. And it dramatically helps improve his general health. And also, I'm able to get him back up in weight with fewer of the metabolic syndrome problems because we implement the use of a CPAP. We get adequate vitamin D3. We get adequate choline in the diet, which is protective of the liver. We try to use fewer fats and more carbs for growing. Which I know people think that carbohydrates are stored as fat, but it actually happens at a very small rate, 3 to 5% probably. So it's easier to utilize those calories when he's training to partition them into muscle tissue, and he is training a lot. And so I use fewer fats, obviously, because he's at a calorie surplus. Those fats would just get stored as fat. And so I give him the carbs necessary to fill his muscles. But you can see it's, I mentioned a whole host of different things that he does to gain the weight. So yeah, weight loss is fantastic for general health, even with blood sugars. Now, there is some research to suggest that even if you maintain the same body weight and you reduce carbohydrates, you can see some improvement in blood sugars without weight loss. And so there is some research to suggest that that's the case. And this is equating for protein and for body mass and waist measurement. So there could be, for those people who have some degree of type 2 diabetes, there's a whole range, of course, that lowering carbs is definitely an effective strategy, at least initially. I'm concerned, and I've recommended it. I've recommended the carnivore diet to people with significant digestive disorders and autoimmune disorders. And I've recommended keto and intermittent fasting to obese people with type 2 diabetes as a strategy to dramatically impact their blood sugars immediately, because that can have a huge effect on their appetite. When somebody gets hypoglycemic, they're going to just be voracious. They're going to eat, a dozen donuts and not even feel satisfied. It's one of the things controlling hunger is huge. So I've recommended those diets for sure. Long term, I think that in terms of compliance, the research seems to suggest that a more balanced diet is a better lifestyle for weight loss maintenance. And so I do, offer them an opportunity to bring their carbs back up once they're sensitive to them, and it won't impact their blood sugars or their energy levels or their appetite as severely as it would have, a month prior. So all strategies, all very effective, I think, and it's individualistic. I can't suggest that that's going to work for everyone.
Right. I think one of the things with me doing the carnivore diet the way I did is that I didn't have the cravings like I thought I would. Like, I once a month or something, I'd go out and I went and got a pizza, and I was like, the pizza wasn't anywhere near as good as I remembered it. And I don't know if that's because I just hadn't been eating it, or if it's because I love steak so much, I don't even want to eat chicken breasts anymore. Like I tried to check out my protein one night, and I go, this is not steak. I don't want this. So I went back to eating steak, and then I kind of added chicken in with it. Which I
haven't had chicken in 10 years.
Yeah, it's not.
In my seminar in Iceland, I was cautious. Remember I said I don't demonize foods except for seed oils. But I don't consider that a food, to be honest with you. I put up a slide at the very beginning of the seminar, good, better, best. And I put chicken can be a good protein. Steak is best. We just discussed its higher in micronutrients, and iron, B12, and zinc in particular, and a whole bunch of other nutrients. It's also a ruminant animal, so it converts omega-6s, it converts polyunsaturated fats into saturates and monounsaturates. The monogastric animals like chickens and turkeys and pigs, they end up with an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 17 or 25 to 1, whereas ruminant animals, bison, beef, lamb, deer, they have about a 3 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. I think that can have some impact. I know Dr. Paul Saladino has been talking a lot about that recently with seed oils in particular, in terms of insulin sensitivity at the fat cell, making people hungrier and potentially more susceptible to an acceleration of fatty liver into steatohepatitis or to liver disease. It was Chris Masterjohn who actually discussed that in greater length, the difference between saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats, seed oils in particular, in terms of your susceptibility to liver damage, fatty liver, and its advance. So, I'm cautious delving into these mechanisms of action. I like to talk about, a lot of people will try and find reasons why things should work or could work. I like to talk about things that do work, I like to stay focused on outcomes. There's a lot of talk in the cholesterol industry about markers of cardiovascular disease, such as elevated LDLs, et cetera. I like to look at the makers, which is going to be obviously, the obesity, the high iron, the high blood sugars, the high blood pressure. Those are certainly makers. The cholesterol conversation is much smarter and much deeper than I can pretend to understand. I follow all the lipidologists closely, and I listen to all their stuff, and there seems to be a lot of nuance, as we previously discussed with respect to red meat and cholesterol, that a healthy diet's a healthy diet, and if you're losing weight and you're maintaining a reasonable lean body mass and exercising regularly and sleeping and consuming lean proteins from a variety of sources, that there isn't much likelihood that it's going to be a concern for your cardiovascular health long term.
Now, something that you talked about that works, and you already mentioned it, is sodium, having salt in our diet, which has decreased over the years because of being villainized as something that causes high blood pressure, and yet it's just been discovered in the past few years that that's not true, and you actually encourage it. In fact, it was because of you I started taking like a half of a teaspoon of salt at night before I go to bed, simply because I was noticing that I was getting cramping in my hands, cramping in my feet, cramping in my abs, which were the worst. And it wasn't when I was doing abs, it was just when I was sitting there and all of a sudden I would bend over or something, and your abs are trying to cramp up on you, and you're having to stretch back so you don't double over. And I noticed since I started doing that, I don't have that.
Boy, this is a huge topic. I should start off by saying that this advice is for healthy individuals, that there are hypertensive, a small percentage of the population has a predisposition to salt sensitivity and elevated blood pressure from salt consumption. It is a small percentage of the population. I hate when people make generalizations and give the rest of the population sodium consumption advice based on those who have these hypertensive issues. The same would be true if somebody was allergic to peanuts, and so you told everybody not to eat peanuts. It just doesn't make any sense. So, or somebody was lactose intolerant, so you told everybody not to drink milk when it can be quite beneficial. It's been proven to actually be protective of cardiovascular disease, heart disease. A whole other topic. But with respect to salt, if you're a sedentary, overweight, hypertensive individual that's eating a can of Pringles daily, tune out. This conversation is not for you. Don't eat any more salt, okay? Don't add it to your food. And some of the medical community decided to jump up and down and scream and yell when I did this video, but claiming that very same thing. Stan, you're going to hurt people with this advice. It's not for those people. But for the general population who's active, and especially for those people who have started a diet, if you are no longer eating fast food and packaged food, you're going to dramatically decrease your salt intake. And if you don't then add it back in, it's going to impact performance, stamina, endurance, recovery, like you mentioned, cramping, all of those things. Brain fog, standing up from a seated position and getting dizzy, like you might see with your mom or your grandmother who's on the DASH diet, complaining about how tired she is all the time and dizzy. That's sodium. All of those things. Or like in your case, whether it's keto or carnivore, you end up with the glycogen depletion, which attaches 3 or 4 parts water to every 1 part glycogen, and that's 70% sodium. You end up losing a significant amount of salt from your body, sodium, particularly inside the muscle cell where the contraction and relaxation is occurring. And so we see a lot of people end up with what they call the keto flu, or carnivore people with those kinds of symptoms. And for most of them, it can be easily remedied just by adding some salt back into their diet. And then you won't be as tired and experiencing any of those symptoms. You might think it's carbohydrates, but I've seen in so many cases, it's actually sodium depletion that's causing the problem. I do like to put some carbs around workouts and because it is a courier for the salt. It does hold more water in the muscle cell. Part of muscle hypertrophy is actually the what they call the muscle full effect, the sarcoplasm actually filling with glycogen and water, and the pressure that those cells then force against each other. There's a great chapter in Brad Schoenfeld's new hypertrophy book that talks through this at length, about how about 20% of hypertrophy happens simply from the muscle full effect in the absence of mechanical tension, lifting weights, which is pretty extraordinary to think that 20% of your growth can happen just from creating that muscle full effect, a little bit of glycogen and some water and salt. So I found it to be hugely beneficial, obviously for energy and stamina endurance. My workouts can last longer. I've never been able to tolerate using central nervous system stimulators or, like caffeine and stuff like that, stimulants. They made me jittery and shake. I tell the story about the year I was in the animal cage lifting, which was like, I think 1 week after I competed in a bodybuilding show at the Ironman Pro down in LA. And I went to I was getting ready to do a 500-pound incline press in the animal cage. And it was packed with people and they were all in there. And one of the animal guys hands me a drink. And I never drink stimulants because I know how they affect me. They just go right through my blood-brain barrier. I get dizzy. My hands start to shake. But there I am standing in front of hundreds of people, and he hands me this drink. And I got to drink it. I'm in the animal cage. And so I drink the thing down and I set it down. And then, I walked around for maybe a minute and then I sat down on the bench and I reached back to grab the bar and my whole body was shaking. My knees were shaking. My hands were shaking. And Keith lifted that bar up off to me and a fucking bar was shaking like this. I thought for sure I was going to drop that thing right on my fucking face.
Oh, man.
And, I don't know if there was a video of it, but it felt absolutely awful. But nonetheless, I don't use pre-workouts, but I do take salt before workouts. And it has.
How long before your workout? Because I saw that you do that, and I was like, oh, how long before your workout do you take the salt, and how much?
Sometimes immediately for sometimes 30 minutes. And it's a quarter teaspoon of salt is 500 milligrams of sodium. Remember, salt is sodium chloride. It's 40% sodium, 60% chloride makes up salt. So if I use the terms interchangeably, I'll try and make sure I define it. But I try and take 500 milligrams of sodium, which is a quarter teaspoon of salt, along with about 8 ounces of water, about 20 or 30 minutes before a workout. And I've just noticed that my workouts are dramatically improved. I can go longer without hitting a wall. I have more stamina and endurance. My body temperature is more under control. I have more blood volume. When you start lifting weights, the blood gets drawn into the muscles, which will make less for circulation. And so the salt helps increase blood volume. We use this with our athletes. The CrossFit National Championships, Camille LeBlanc was competing. We used actually half a teaspoon or 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And before and after before and after, by the way, this is consistent with the recommendation from the International Society of Sports Nutrition as well. This isn't something I'm over here proposing that isn't commonly known in the training world. It's just been so demonized that it hasn't filtered out to the recreational athlete, for which it could be a great benefit, particularly the CrossFitters, et cetera, that are in there really crushing workouts. Camille gained a pound of body weight over the 5 days of competing at the Reebok Championships. The first year she didn't lose 4 or 5 pounds. And that was just because we kept her better hydrated. She was also pounding some Monster Mash when the opportunity presents itself. And it's really easy to eat that meal, And so I was able to get more calories into her. But it's hugely beneficial, again, in terms of brain fog, dizziness, stamina, recovery, endurance, all of those things. And it's necessary, particularly when you're, on a diet or eating quote unquote clean, very beneficial. Those people who are hypertensive, I should back up and say that this has been studied by the World Heart Federation, run by a cardiologist by the name of Dr. Salam Youssef, who's the president. One of the largest studies was the PURE study. They had over 100,000 people in this sodium test in particular in 22 countries. And they actually tested sodium excretion with urinary testing. And so it was a pretty accurate test. It wasn't just epidemiology. And they found that it was kind of a healthy range for an average individual of 3 to 6 grams of sodium a day, which is about 8 to 15 grams of salt, by the way. Below 3 grams of sodium for all populations, including hypertensive individuals and people suffering from heart disease, by the way, there was an increase in all-cause mortality. So that runs contrary to the recommendation of the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization, who wants you to consume 1.5 grams of sodium in their DASH diet. What the DASH diet does, the reason why it's been shown to help people with blood pressure, is because it increases fruit and vegetable consumption. It increases potassium and magnesium. That is the primary driver of the help with the blood pressure, not the sodium restriction. The same is true in this study, in the PURE study, and other studies. When you get up over 7 grams of sodium a day, this is beyond the high end. I said 3 to 6 was the healthy range in these studies. When you get north of 7 grams a day, your hypertensive individuals start to see an increase in all-cause mortality. Not as significant as the increase for below 3 grams, by the way. So over-consuming had less impact on all-cause mortality than under-consuming for hypertensive individuals.
Wow.
But for the general population, it had very little effect. When they introduced adequate potassium to both populations, the increase flattened out. So it seems that getting adequate potassium intake is the way to manage the potential increase in blood pressure while still benefiting from all of the benefits I mentioned previously. So that's one of the things I focus on in my diet, is picking foods that are high in potassium as part of the foundation of the diet. I ask the people, eat a potato every day. It's got 1,000 milligrams of potassium in it, twice as much as a banana. Eat fruit, very high in potassium. And both of those, by the way, if we want to talk about diet compliance and hunger, both of those are very high on the satiety index. Or satiety, however you choose to say it. there's an index that measures how long certain foods keep you full for. And the potato and the orange are at the very high end of that index, two of the most satiating foods you can eat. And so I recommend those in all of my weight loss diets because of satiety, but also the added benefit of being high in potassium, which between the sodium and potassium together dramatically helps reduce cravings and provides you more energy. And so it's a double whammy in terms of compliance by satisfying your appetite and giving you more energy. And so potassium, about 4,700 milligrams a day is what we recommend, certainly north of 4,000. And then to salt your foods to taste. Your tongue will tell you when you're getting adequate salt. It's a negative feedback loop. You don't just keep wanting more and more like sugar. You get too much and it'll be aversive. Your body will not want it. Your tongue will tell you it's too much. And that changes with the size of the athlete, their workload, their sweat rate, the temperature, the humidity, all of those things. And your body is actually pretty good at regulating that. The research comes from Dr. Sandra Godek at the Heat Institute. She's a PhD in thermoregulation and hydration. They do all the sweat testing on the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm so familiar with them because I work with Lane Johnson of the Philadelphia Eagles, who is measured to have a level 5 sweat rate. He sweats out 5 grams of sodium an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. Part of that we were able to correct. We were actually able to reduce his sweat rate by getting him to wear his CPAP and by bringing his blood pressure down. And we brought his blood pressure down with the CPAP, the vitamin D3, improved his insulin sensitivity, took 10-minute walks after meals. All of those things dramatically improved his blood pressure. He started at, I think his systolic was 155 when I started working with him, and he was 312 pounds. He's now 333, and his systolic blood pressure was 123 at his last reading. So his blood pressure actually came down as a result of implementing all of those lifestyle behaviors, plus the increased potassium intake from food, the vitamin D3, obviously, the 10-minute walks, the CPAP. All of those things had a dramatic effect on his blood pressure overall, which reduced his sweat rate. And of course, that improves his stamina and endurance when he's out there playing on the field. They have a game today, as a matter of fact. It'll be interesting to see how they do. He's back on the field.
Now you're, again, there's so many things that you cover. I sit there and go, I want to make sure I cover. One, you're a big proponent of the 10-minute walk, which I think is great. Because almost anybody can do a 10-minute walk, and if you can't, you can start off with a 1-minute walk and build your way up, So, so, people who sit there and go, well, 10 minutes isn't enough to do anything. I mean, what do you say to people like that?
Oh, it's huge. It's enough to do a lot of things. Even more important, I mentioned earlier that more exercise does not equal more fat loss. We've seen in studies that it's a bad way to try and lose weight. So we encourage people to, obviously to create a calorie deficit and then to lift weights to retain lean body mass. As for exercise, the weightlifting itself can provide a significant exercise benefit, and it can increase your heart rate more than a typical treadmill session if you're training as hard as you should be anyhow. When you measure cardiovascular health or exercise and its impact on cardiovascular health, it's a bit of a you would call it a U-shaped curve, I guess. In the absence of exercise, you're going to have poor health. Too much exercise can also cause poor health. We see this in runners with enlarged, thinned heart walls who suffer from cardiovascular problems. So there is kind of an ideal range at which you can benefit, for in terms of long-term health. And they measure that in VO2 max. They look at, and it's measured in METs, metabolic equivalents. And somewhere in the 7 to 9 range of metabolic equivalents, 7 is a 13-minute mile. Walking up 4 flights of stairs without getting winded. That's not, terribly aggressive. That's something you can accomplish with a brisk 10-minute walk with an arm swing. And if you're doing 3 of them a day, you're going to, get, 40% more than, I think 210 minutes a week is or 140 minutes a week is what's recommended by, I think, the American Heart Association for the amount of exercise that you should get to optimize heart health. And so I'm recommending 3 10-minute walks a day is 210 minutes, and I'm looking at about a 7 met, just from a brisk walk. I think you're accomplishing all of the cardiovascular benefits. Now there's additional benefits to the 10-minute walk. One I mentioned is blood sugars. When we look at blood sugars, what we look at is the area under the curve. How high your blood sugars go and how long they stay sustained. They stay high, and then your insulin right behind it. How high your insulin, how much insulin you release, and the duration at which that insulin stays elevated. We call that the area under the curve. That's why all the popularity with continuous glucose monitors now, to see how to certain meals raise your blood sugar and how long does it stay elevated. What's your peak and your recovery rate after 2 hours, let's say.
Can I stop you just for 1 second? Because
sure.
I'm going to forget if I don't ask you right now. So on the vertical diet, you recommend, it includes a lot of rice in there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So doesn't the rice, isn't that, because it's a simple carb, doesn't that raise the sugar levels?
Let's look at a few things. Let's start by saying a lot of carbs. We start out with a gram of protein per pound of body weight, and then around 0.3 to 0.4 grams of fat per pound of body weight. Carbs is what's left. If you're on a diet, if you're eating, say, 2,000 calories a day, and you're a 200-pound person, 800 of those calories is going to come from protein. And if we're doing 0.4 grams per pound, then you're going to do about, 60 grams of fats, another 540 calories. You're going to be getting 1,500 or 1,600 calories from protein and fat in that 2,000 calorie diet. That leaves 400 or 500 calories for carbs. That's about 100 to 125 grams a day. Not a lot of carbs. Now, if you're a highly active 200-pound individual and you're burning 4,000 calories a day because you're a CrossFitter training twice a day, that's when you will eat more carbs to fuel the workload. I hate to use the word earn the carbs, but in fact, there's a very specific purpose for the carbs. So let me start by saying that the amount of carbs you eat is dependent on your workload. And they're generally under 30% or 25% for most dieters. And then they'll go 40 to 50, 55% or higher for most athletes, because that's when they're optimal for performance, consistent with the ISSN and the NSCA, by the way. Now let's talk about the glycemic index. The glycemic index measures the blood sugar response to carbohydrates when eaten in isolation. When you consume those carbohydrates with proteins and fats, they do not have the same effects on blood sugars. Glycemic load is a completely different index based on the amount of carbohydrates you consume in any one meal. That is a better way, a better metric to use, and would have a greater effect on your postprandial, your after meal blood glucose elevation. And so I do watch how much carbohydrates you eat. Again, for that population that's dieting and needs to lose fat and may have some elevated blood sugars, we look at the glycemic load, the amount of carbohydrates consumed in any one meal, more closely than we look at the type, because that type would be affected by the protein and fat. It would blunt that elevation. Now, it is somewhat individualistic, which is why continuous glucose monitors are such a valuable tool, because some people may respond poorly to one carbohydrate and not to another, and it might be different with the different individual. Very individualistic. Having said that, we do not put a lot of carbs in a dieter's diet who has any issues with blood sugars. Around 100 to 125 grams a day is very controllable, particularly when it's split up over 4 meals. And when those carbs, I mentioned that I start with a potato and an orange. The orange in particular, being higher in fructose and more fiber and water, does not move blood glucose very much. And the potato, is only going to be, a small portion a couple times a day to get your adequate potassium. The rice comes in later. A lot of my dieters probably never get to white rice because they're in a restricted diet and they're eating, fruits and vegetables and, spinach and a potato to satisfy their micronutrient demands. Rice is not terribly micronutrient dense, if at all. And so I really only utilize that to fuel performance for athletes who have a lot of body mass or a huge workload because they're easy to digest, and they provide a really simple glucose source for them or glycogen source for their workouts. So that kind of covers that that topic. So we'll go back to the area under the curve with postprandial consumption of carbohydrates. We're trying to reduce those as much as possible for long-term health. The 10-minute walk is twice as effective as metformin, the #1 prescribed type 2 diabetes medication in the world. In study after study shows that movement, particularly movement that is immediately following a meal, can reduce the incidence of type 2 diabetes or reverse type 2 diabetes twice as effectively as metformin. And the 10-minute walk is a huge contributor to that when it's immediately following a meal, because it reduces the peak glucose and the duration of that glucose in the bloodstream, primarily because muscles will take up glucose from the bloodstream in the absence of the need of insulin. So now your insulin isn't rising as high or staying elevated as long. So that's one of the key components for taking the 10-minute walk after meals is for blood sugar control. Really helps with some people will get after a big meal where their glucose elevates significantly and then the insulin chases it. The glucose will also fall very fast and they'll end up a little bit hypoglycemic and start to get tired and maybe even hungry again and have the shakes and those kinds of things. And so it helps remedy that. It also helps with digestion. It increases the enzymatic action and the muscular contraction. So now you get less gas and bloating. I say it reduces gas. Mark Bell says it releases gas on the 10-minute walk. But either way, you're not bringing it home with you.
Maybe
so the wife's happy.
Nickname from is that's where he got his nickname. So.
Yeah. And on top of the blood sugar control and the digestion benefit and the cardiovascular benefits, it's also sustainable. And that's one of the big things. It's something anybody can do anywhere. You can put your kids' breakfast on the table, go take a 10-minute walk. And it can be a bike. You can have a recumbent bike or a stationary bike in the garage or in your living room. Hafthor has one in his garage that he uses after meals because in Iceland, you might not be able to walk. If you live in downtown Detroit, you're probably not going to want to take 10-minute walks after meals. It could be life-threatening. But so it doesn't matter. I like to move the legs. It's been shown in many studies that the muscles of the legs have a much greater effect on reducing blood sugars than because they'll pull those sugars out of the bloodstream. So I like to move the legs, and I love the recumbent bike for the knees and all that, for recovery. Also, if you look at any of Dr. Stuart McGill's stuff from the Back Mechanic, he shows a great benefit for walking in terms of pain and recovery from, say, back injury or, relief of pain for back. Particularly with an aggressive arm swing, because the body then starts to create this stabilization force that helps the lower back get lots of blood without bending and twisting and stretching, which might actually cause more problems than it solves. And so we find that people, they have a lot of relief in lower back, knee, hip issues when they start doing these 10-minute walks periodically throughout the day. And the frequency matters. They've studied sedentary individuals, say office workers who sit all day. Those that get up and move frequently throughout the day receive a health benefit, a decrease in all-cause mortality and general health markers. And those who sit all day and then exercise for an equivalent amount of time at the end of the day don't receive the same benefit. And you certainly wouldn't receive the digestive benefits or the blood sugar control from meals if it were just one bout at the end of the day. So the idea that 30 or 40 minutes on the treadmill at the end of the day is equivalent to 3 10-minute walks isn't supported by the literature. So it's preferable to do the less frequent or the more frequent, shorter duration activity throughout the day.
So it's not just doing the 10-minute walk though. It's doing it right. All right. So you know how people are. They're going to sit
within 30 minutes.
Right. Okay. There you go. You already knew what I was going to ask.
I know where you're headed. Yeah.
But that's how people are. They're like, well, am I supposed to wait an hour? Am I, is it like swimming? So.
Yeah. The Big Rock would say, just take the walk, whether it's 1 minute or 1 hour later. The Big Rock is take the walk. And then
right. From
there, if you're looking for the 1%, I think most of the research is 30 minutes following a meal.
Okay. Very good. And so, one of the things I wanted to say about since I started taking the salt is one, I didn't realize until you said it that I am getting a better night's sleep. I'm not nearly as tired, and I just started noticing that, and I was like, I'm really glad it's happening, but I didn't know why all of a sudden it started happening. And now that you mentioned that, that salt helps with, overcoming fatigue, I can definitely see that. The one thing I will say about taking salt though, is I feel that bloated feeling that I haven't been feeling, where I feel like in my stomach. And is that from water retention or from taking that?
I got to be careful how much and whether or not you take it with a carbohydrate, because it does help shuttle. Too much salt in an empty stomach will pull water into the stomach and then expel it. It's not a more is better scenario. I have had even my own training partner when he saw my video on sodium intake, he downed like a whole tablespoon of salt, and then I get a text he's not making it to the workout. It'll give you diarrhea.
Oh, well.
I'm really cautious to let people know that deficiencies and surpluses will cause problems. That's true with vitamins and minerals. It's true with salt. It's true with food. It's true with training. All of it is true. So you got to try and find the sweet spot in there. And people generally tolerate 500 milligrams, 1/4 teaspoon with 8 ounces of water, very well. The ISSN even recommended, if you want to load more salt than that 2 hours before training, you can consume 500 milligrams. 30 minutes later, 500 milligrams. This is with 8 ounces of water. 30 minutes later, 500 milligrams. Rather than trying to take 1,500 milligrams in one bolus and take it about 30 minutes apart. And it might better be able to be absorbed into the body without it being alarmed and right, pulling in water and causing the diarrhea.
Well, so let me say this. I know that when you train for your IFBB card, that you train with Flex Wheeler.
Yep.
And I've told people this, many times, who ask me questions like, why would a personal trainer or, someone with knowledge train with someone else? And I go, look, it doesn't matter how much you know. There's always somebody who knows maybe more or knows something that you don't know that can help. And there's
100%.
something about, somebody who has that experience, and it's not just knowledge, it's experience that matters, probably more than the knowledge, because, I always say that learned knowledge and applied knowledge are two different things, and applied knowledge is always better, because learned knowledge, it might look good on paper, but in real life scenarios, it doesn't always work the way it says it does on paper. And so having people who have that experience, and someone like Flex Wheeler, of course, is one of the greatest bodybuilders ever, to take and have him train you to that. I mean, obviously the results were fantastic. So with that in mind, even though I have 30 years plus experience as a personal trainer myself, I'm going to do your program. and hire you, I know you're out in Vegas, so I'll have to be online or whatever. I'm going to do the vertical diet. Now, I must emphasize to people who are listening that as a personal trainer, I can tell you that the success or failure of a client is strictly on the client. If they're successful, it's because they put the work in, it's because they did what they were told to do. And if they're not, it's usually because they didn't do what they were told to do and eat the way they were supposed to eat, and they just fell by the wayside. And so, I'm not going to sit there and go, well, Stan, I did your diet and I didn't lose weight or I didn't gain muscle or whatever. I realize it's completely on me, but I want to see doing the vertical diet and doing the monster mash, because I'm looking forward to that because it just sounds good. And getting your training expertise, because I have a birthday coming up. I'm not going to tell people how old I am online, but I'll tell you afterwards. And it's a special birthday. So I have some things I want to accomplish at this age. And I want to, I really would like to set the world record in the bench press at my age, in natural and raw. But I know that the organization I looked at, it wasn't very much, and I was like, oh, the world record's got to be more than that. And I'm sure it is in one of the major organizations. So we will talk about that anyway. So I really want to, and I want to be able to get back to my listeners and viewers, so that they can see that, look, it's as you said, you got to, all these diets will work. It's what will work for you, what you'll stick to. And then the main reason why I want to do this is I want to see the health benefits from it, and because I truly believe that that's what should be key when people are choosing what kind of diet they want to do, not just necessarily one that tastes good. I mean, obviously that's a big plus, but what's best for them. So
Yeah, agreed. That's going to be the big thing. And also, when somebody starts a diet and they've got a BMI of 30, they're going to get great results.
right.
Get from 30 to 25 is not very hard. You need to implement a little of this, a little of that, and bam, you're there. As your BMI continues to drop, as your body fat percentage continues to drop, and your goal is to drop it more and more, it becomes harder and harder. You have to be more and more disciplined. You have to train a little more. You have to eat a little more regimented, more consistently, sleep more, all of those things. And that's where my checklist comes into place. And after a while, the gains are slower and slower and take longer and longer, and you got to be patient. So that's the way this thing works. It has to definitely be a lifestyle, and you have to be patient and persistent, because oftentimes I'll get clients that are trying to get into the best shape of their life, who might have too short of a window. They might want to put on too much muscle and lose too much fat and gain too much strength too quickly.
Right.
And there's no magic out there. This was a 30-year adventure for me.
Right, exactly. And I think it's important people realize that. And you make a great point. The first 5 pounds to come off is easy. It's the last 5 pounds that can take a while to get off of you.
That's right.
You've got to go through the process and give it the time that's needed to reach the goals that you want. So I'd say one last thing. If you had one piece of advice to give to people about training and about nutrition, one piece of advice for both of those topics, what would that be?
Man, this is so hard, because it's never any one thing. People ask me if I knew then what I know now, all the things I've learned throughout my career. Some of the big ones were when I was 18 and I started training. I was 140 pounds in college. I couldn't bench 135. I was a skinny kid.
That's so hard to imagine to see.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. My first bodybuilding show, I weighed 158 on stage.
Wow.
Yeah. at 6 foot. So I was quite skinny. What I learned is kind of what we covered here a little bit earlier. Is I was training 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I was eating like tuna fish and rice cakes. So you don't grow in the gym is the big lesson there. Is that I needed to learn to get an adequate stimulus to grow without overtraining, and I needed to eat a lot more calories to be in a surplus to recover from that training to grow. So that's kind of both in one. And also, I thought that lifting heavier weights would make me bigger, and that's not the case. Powerlifting does not have, I can't think of any benefits for bodybuilding. I just can't. And it's coming from a powerlifter who, with over 30 years. I don't see any benefit. Bodybuilding is a completely different animal. Bodybuilding benefited powerlifting significantly.
Really?
Yeah, larger muscle, a larger cross-sectional area of a muscle can have a potential to be stronger. That's kind of how we measure your potential for strength. It also increases the number of mitochondria. It increases your cardiovascular fitness. You can recover from training better. I remember even Dmitry Klokov used to complain his dad would make him do a lot of cardio in the off season. And he didn't like it because he would get weaker. But then when he would come back to training and preparing for the Olympics, he said that he recovered faster. It had a carryover effect. When he got rid of all the cardio and started just strength training, that he benefited from all of that extra, having, better cardiovascular fitness, blood oxygenation, more mitochondria, as I mentioned. So powerlifting did not help me become a better bodybuilder, because obviously the rep range is generally too low and the frequency and the volume is too low to really build muscle. But bodybuilding helped with powerlifting quite a bit. So I do encourage all of my, Eddie Cohn for 30 years competed. He did 2 powerlifting meets a year. And in between each powerlifting meet, he did a hypertrophy circuit to build muscle and to improve weaknesses, because you work from such a variety of different angles. You don't become closed in like on a bench. You got to work your back more to get, to balance out your muscles. He used more unilateral, one leg exercises, lunges, one-legged leg presses, rows, overhead presses, things that you wouldn't traditionally do on a platform. And he worked in a higher rep range with more volume. And he went from 165, or I think it was 165 pounds in his first competition, to 242 over the course of his career by building more muscle. But he did that with his hypertrophy training, not with his powerlifting training. So if that's more than one thing, then it's all relevant. I think that people understand there's a difference between those two sports, and that you can't just lift heavy all the time. And you certainly, nutrition and sleep, everything I did outside the gym was the most important factor for why I was successful in competition.
Did Ed, he was the only person, I think, that's ever bench press 3 times his body weight? Was that, do you know whether that was?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know he bench pressed in the high 500s, 570, 575 up in there at one point.
He used to compete at like 220, and I think he even competed at 180 at some point. And I think maybe that's when he did it, because I know he competed in different weight divisions throughout.
Yeah. I'm not sure. He's broken so many records, it's hard to remember. I read his book, The Man, the Myth, the Method, and he has a lot of great information in there as well. That just by chance throughout my career, just because I competed in powerlifting and bodybuilding, for no other reason, not because I designed it that way, because I enjoyed both, I benefited from the fact that I had to diet down from my, I'd bulk up to sometimes 300 pounds to powerlift, in the off season. And that comes with all the problems we talked about earlier with the metabolic syndrome. And I would compete in powerlifting, and then I would diet down to a bodybuilding show. And every single time I bulked up and dieted down, I would come into my next bodybuilding show with a little more muscle than I did before. And then I would slingshot my weight up to where I was heavier than the heaviest I was before. So the dieting down and slingshotting back and dieting down and slingshotting back, the way I did that throughout my career, I was able to get bigger and stronger, and I was able to maintain more muscle powerlifting or bodybuilding. So I went from competing at 158 to 165 to 198 to 205 to 212 to 220 to 230 to 240 to, all throughout my career. It was a long, gradual process. It took many, many, many years with lots of plateaus along the way. But that method, and I'm not talking about dirty bulking. I learned those lessons. I got too fat many times and had to diet too aggressively and lost too much leg mass, doing too much cardio and, over restricting. So I learned a lot of those lessons along the way. But now the way I propose that people do it is much more sensible, with less restriction, less cardio, less fat gain, more attention to your health markers, all of those things that we discussed.
Okay, I have two questions I want to ask you that I don't know if they're. We'll see if these are myth busters or what. So,
yeah.
All right, we've always been taught there are different body types: the ectomorph, the mesomorph, endomorph, and that's supposedly been busted. But let me ask you this, because this is something that I was taught back in the day, and I still have a hard time letting go of, because I see people like Ronnie Coleman, for instance, who's just, he was just a monster of a man and could do ungodly weight that only probably you could do as a bodybuilder. And yet I see the injuries that he has endured through because of all this heavy weight that he's been doing, that he'd been doing over the years. And I couldn't help but, think, that he was more of a mesomorph because he had such a tiny waist, because his bone structure had been smaller, that while his muscles could handle that weight, his skeletal, body couldn't handle that weight. And that's why he has the injuries, where we see people who are more like endomorphs who can handle just, these weights and never be bothered by them whatsoever. But you're saying that's a fallacy?
You can describe people that way, but you can't assign a different nutrition protocol for them other than calorie surplus, calorie deficit. If they're quote unquote an endomorph and they tend to or they carry more body fat, then they're still going to have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. Genetics will kind of predetermine how you respond to weight training, how much muscle tissue that you're going to be able to carry around or build. But how you affect that is the same. Calorie surplus for your ectomorph. He might be a slower gainer in terms of adding muscle. He might also adapt his adaptive thermogenesis. When he starts eating more calories, his metabolism might speed up more, which requires him to eat even more calories. And that can be an exhausting venture if you don't know how to properly do that. There's a strategy for that I use with my big athletes, being able to eat that many calories. There's easier and harder ways to do it. The types of calories, that's why I do the monster mash with the bone broth and the white rice. It's just easier mechanically to consume more and to digest it faster so you can eat again sooner.
Right.
It's not a magic potion. It's just that if you down a pizza, you're going to be full for a long ass time.
Right.
Whereas if you down a monster mash, another strategy we use, we'll sprinkle a little bit of dextrose on the rice, and it improves amylase production in the mouth and saliva. So you can just eat more rice because it goes down easier. It's really that simple. And seems to be some indication that it increases amylase production from the pancreas as well, which helps you digest the starch bolus that's in your intestines, stomach intestines. So then you'll be able to be hungry again sooner. I did a whole video called 14 Ways to Increase Your Appetite, Rhino's Rant, where I talked about the little strategies that we use to help people eat more food more often when they're trying to gain weight, things to avoid and things to do. It's a strategy. The same way I said with the dieters, to eat the steak, to eat the potato and the orange because they're satiating, and there's just little things that you can do. Eat a dinner salad before dinner. Just some iceberg lettuce with a little shaved carrot and some sliced tomatoes and some fat-free cheese and some apple cider vinegar. Just the bulk of that tends to make it so you eat a smaller dinner and then you stay full longer until breakfast. So you're not getting up, getting a snack at 11 o'clock at night because you're so hungry. Just because you selected, a certain foods and a certain strategy, the dinner salad, that allowed you to stay full longer so you can beat that. Hopefully, it's not like you won't be hungry, but is it manageable? And for weight gainers, it's not like you won't fill up, but can you digest that food a little faster and get hungry sooner? So the first thing Brian Shaw said to me after he was on the diet for a week, he called me up. He says, "Stan, I'm hungry." He said, "I haven't been hungry in years." And anybody who's watched his videos, how laborious it is for him to consume enough calories to support his body weight. It's a full-time job. And if you can implement little strategies, all those ones I mentioned in the video and we just talked about, you can make it at least more achievable to do that. And I talked in another video about training your metabolism, how you need to progress. If you're a 200-pound bencher, you can't go to the gym tomorrow and throw 500 on the bar and ask for a lift off. It's just stupid, And the same thing with diet. If you're eating 3,500 calories and Ronnie Coleman shows you a 6,000 calorie diet, you can't try that tomorrow. You're going to crash and burn. And so you got to go from 3,500 to 3,750 and then 3,750 to 4,000. And I talked about how this process takes, at least it takes many days or weeks. When Flex had me increasing calories, I'd increase 200 or 300 calories and I'd have to eat that every day for 10 or 12 days before my appetite increased. And I was able to then eat more. Right. I let my body lead the way. I didn't keep forcing it, and just end up just bloated and not digesting your food.
Right. All right. So my last question here, and you are the perfect person to ask this question to. So does fat protect muscle when you're powerlifting? Because it seemed like back in the day, and again, it could just be, could be that it seemed that way, but it seemed like back in the 70s and earlier that powerlifters were overweight for the most part. They, and they had a lot of fat that they carried around with them. And they didn't have a whole lot of injuries compared to once powerlifters started leaning up. When you started seeing people like, if I remember correctly, back in the mid 80s or early 80s, Jeff Magruder was one of the first ones to be a powerlifter who could bench press. I think he was in 242-pound weight class. He broke the world record at 642, and he also beat Mike Christensen in a bodybuilding contest. So here's his bodybuilder who beat one of the best bodybuilders of that time, and then goes on and becomes a power lifter and breaks the world's record in the bench press, and then tears his pec. And I was like, okay, so there was always this belief that fat helped protect those muscles. Is that true or not?
I don't know if it's fat per se, but as your body fat percentage decreases, your strength does also seem to decrease, and your susceptibility to muscle pulls and tears. Some of that might be hydration as well. At the high end, we're talking about people might be taking Winstrol or something that actually causes those lean, dry muscles to tear. I have noticed that if people have started to drop weight more, Larry Wheels has had a few injuries, usually when he's leaner. It's a conversation that we had. I told him if he wants to do strongman, he needs to be closer to 300 pounds than 260. You start pulling muscles when you get a little leaner. I think you're a little drier. The tendons in particularly, I think, need to be full. There's also, I think, a bigger effect on leverages. I think that when you have a little more body fat, a little more water retention, a little more pressure, powerlifting is really, about using your body against itself, not isolating muscle groups and creating leverage for the body. And I think that you watch a Chad Wesley Smith do a squat and his belly is into his thighs, those guys with those bigger bellies dropping them down into their thighs. It kind of creates that Bosu ball effect, a little using your body as its own lever, I think that's probably a more important part of that. I know I was pretty lean and I, many times pulled glutes and hamstrings on the squat, just stretching that muscle out really tight. I had some issues. Fortunately, I tried to bulk up for powerlifting to where I was pretty full, and I would get lots of water in. I came to the meet bloated on purpose. At weigh-ins, I would look really lean. I would have a six-pack, and same with Dan Green. I brought Dan Green down from 248 pounds to 220 in 48 hours doing a water cut. In 24 hours after weigh-ins, he was 252 on the platform when he set the 220 world record. 252 when he set the 220 world record. You look at a picture of him when he weighed in, and he was shredded. He could have won any bodybuilding show. He looked fucking phenomenal. But when he actually did the squat, his belly was hanging out over his belt, mine too. You just have better leverages when you're fuller like that. Some of it can be external and some of it might be intracellular as well, as we talked about with the swelling of the muscle cell. So all of that, I think, adds. It's almost like wearing a squat suit when you're full and you're just completely bloated and full. Everything just feels, you can just feel the pressure and everything bouncing off of itself. I used to love the feeling when I was powerlifting.
Oh yeah. And this is the other thing I noticed too, weighing more. Like so when I started Carnivore Diet, I weighed 260, and that's not unusual for me. Normally I'll stay between 240 to 260. I'm down to 225 right now. But what I notice is that even if I can do the same weight, I feel aches and pains at 225 that I didn't feel at 260, which leads me to believe that there's, whether it's hydration or whatever that's happening when you lose that weight, that there's and of course, getting older, I feel more pains that I didn't feel when I was in my 20s, which I'm sure, So
yeah, hard to avoid. Yeah, especially on the bench press. Bench press goes up and down with body weight. That's the first. I trained with Eric Spoto for years, and anybody ever asked him, how to get a bigger bench press, he'd say gain weight. That's it. And he was being serious. He was addressing the most important factor. He didn't tell him about some, periodization lifting program with drop sets and whatever else, and gain weight. That was it. And so I say the same thing when people go into a meet. Like even the ISSN, when people go into an endurance event, like to run, an ultra marathon or something like that, they're recommending, 1,000 grams of carbs a day for 72 hours each day before the event on Saturday. I'm loading people, assuming they don't have a weight class to meet. And even if they do, then I'm refeeding them. Right. And the refeed, I have the whole protocol in the vertical diet because I've done so many of these for people. I've probably worked with almost every world record holder at one time in every weight class in powerlifting, helping them make weight and then refeed. The refeed protocol is just as important as the weight loss protocol. And the way you lose weight will determine how much weight you'll be able to put back on and what effect it'll have on your strength. But I want people to go in full. And so I throw a lot of white rice and salt at them. But I also make sure that they take 10-minute walk after every meal because I don't want all the food sitting in their stomach. I want it getting into the muscles. I want them to be full. And then when they're they have to be cautious of. When you're that full of carbohydrates and water, and D-ball probably, what you have to be cautious of is you do not want to get a pump when you're backstage warming up for your lift.
Right.
That restricts the muscle fiber contraction, and you do not want to get a pump. And so I'm like, do a single. I used to actually warm up on the bench with a one board, and I wouldn't actually touch my chest till I got on the platform. And I used to warm up on the squat onto a box that was a couple inches higher than parallel, because I wanted that last bit of stretch to happen on the platform.
Right.
I didn't want to go too deep. I was a big proponent of not overstretching muscles for losing that stretch reflex. So those are just some strategies that I used that I thought were really helpful. I never did like a set of 10 on bench. I wouldn't go grab the 135 and do 10 reps, because next thing you know, I'd have a fucking pump.
Right, yeah.
And I'd have to sit down for 15 minutes to relax. So I would do a single racket, and then I would do a single again, and before I added weight to start working my way up on bench.
Yeah, and depending on what you were taking, it wouldn't take much more than a single to get you a pump, if depending on what.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Get a back bump just walking around on D-ball.
Oh my God! Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk after. But, so one of the things I love about you is that you're so humble about what you know and stuff, and you don't hesitate to give credit to where credit's due. You talk, the fact that you talk about these people who wrote these books and helped you, because so many people are insecure, will almost act as if they, if they're the ones who created everything, sort of like, never mind, the Weeder effect, it's like the principles. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the fact that you give credit where credit's due, and that you mention all these people who are integral in us having the understanding that we do, and where we're at, nowadays with our training and our diet and understanding of nutrition. So
yeah, I named my diet so people, would be familiar with it. And obviously it makes for a much more marketable product. I think it's a great product, and I'm not embarrassed to try and, get it out there to as many people as possible. So I do have a named diet. I have the vertical diet, but everything in it is stuff that I've learned from other people or read somewhere. Matter of fact, none of it's really new. Vince Gironda was telling people to eat steak and whole eggs back in the 60s. And how we deviated from that, or when and where, at what time, I don't know. But it works, and I'm happy to let people know that's what Vince was talking about 50 years ago. Also, he was telling people to eat sea kelp for iodine. And,
right.
In the 1920s, the CDC put iodine in salt because of goiter. So it's not new that I'm pushing things like iodine and steak and whole eggs and any of that. Even the Monster Mash, my grandfather called that shit on a shingle, as his grandfather probably did too. I don't claim to have invented any of this stuff. I just like to put it all together in a real easy, form that people can be like, oh shit, yeah. And I did a video called 10 Life-Changing Things That I Don't Make Any Money On. and I, in there is the salt and the Monster Mash and the thermos and, and the CPAP and all this other shit that I think has been hugely beneficial for me and the people that I work with, that some folks may just not have come across as, a tip or trick, or, a lot of people are busier with real lives, and they don't just lift and eat and read about lifting and eating. So, and that's all I do. And so I find these things that are incredibly useful. And, the 10-minute walk, I didn't invent those. I probably popularized them, at least amongst the lifting community, more so than Mark Bell and I have been pushing those pretty hard since I introduced it to him, 4 years ago on his podcast. But I didn't invent 10-minute walks. it's just, it's part of the protocol that is very beneficial for people, and they're grateful that they heard it from me. But I don't think people by any stretch of the imagination assume that somehow I was the creator. Like I'm, I don't know. I'm just happy to share.
I think you provide an important service, and because you do put it all together for people so that they don't have to go out and figure out all this stuff, on their own. Because look, I found this guy and he called something Life Hacks. Anyway, what he did, you know who Dr. David Sinclair is?
Oh, sure. Yep.
Okay. So Dr. Sinclair talks about metformin and NMN and all that, and all these things that he takes for longevity of life.
Yep.
And what this guy did is he went and listened to all the different podcasts, read his book, and put all this stuff together, and said, these are the amounts he's taking. This is what he's taking, and he broke it down. And so, to me, that's worth. I would have paid him for it. He put it out there free, but I would have certainly paid for it, so I don't have to go do that research. You've done all this research, so I have no problems going, hey, Stan, take my money. Thanks for doing what I don't want to do. I appreciate it.
I think it's funny that people are like, Stan, you're charging $100 for your ebook. Do you know how many tens of thousands of dollars? Let me see. Did I lose you there?
Yeah, there you're back. You're back.
I mean, do you know how many tens of thousands of dollars I spent acquiring this information over all these years? I mean, just the amount of money I paid Flex Wheeler alone.
Right.
$200 a day for 2 months straight to train me twice a day. And that was a bargain. That was like half what he normally charged. That was $12,000 or $14,000 just in training with Flex Wheeler. And of course, not to go on and on, but the fact of the matter is it would cost you over $100 to spend 1 hour with a qualified personal trainer. And I've got a 220-page ebook that talks about things I've learned from 20 different professionals in the industry in great depth, referencing all their research and compiling it all for you. And what's interesting, it's just funny that you mentioned David Sinclair. I too follow all of his stuff. I've read many of his stuff. I've watched hours and hours and hours of his videos, obviously, Joe Rogan and others, along with Dr. Walter Longo, along with Dr. Peter Attia. The three of them are probably some of the leaders in the longevity industry and research. Well, not research with Dr. Attia, but certainly Walter Longo and Sinclair are the researchers. Peter Attia has managed to compile a lot of great information and present it in a somewhat understandable format. These guys are on another level.
Yeah, they
but
are.
I'll tell you what, these guys, I don't know how to say this, they're as bad a guinea pigs as those of us in the bodybuilding industry.
Right.
They're out there randomly trying shit, to see if it works on themselves and any, client that's interested in trying. And they're not always right. I mean, they were wrong on metformin. Walter Longo won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. David Sinclair has stopped. David Sinclair has stopped taking it.
Really?
He takes it. Well, he takes it periodically. He'll take it on days off of exercise.
Right. Because
Peter Attia took it for years, has stopped taking it. Metformin blunts the hypertrophy response from training.
Right.
And it interferes with mitochondrial function. It may be of benefit for a type 2 diabetic who is unwilling or unable to do the exercise necessary to correct their blood sugars on their own, to lose body fat and to control blood sugars. Those people, it can be of benefit to. But if you're an athlete that's exercising, not recommended. It'll make you weaker. I did a video 4 years ago talking about this because I tried metformin 10 years ago and personally realized a loss of strength and then started seeing it in other strength athletes. They'd be like, oh God, I've lost strength recently. And I would be like, you taking metformin? And it kept coming up over and over, long before all of this research came. Just as a practical matter, as somebody who both trains and interacts with trainers or strength athletes at a very high level, within 2 weeks, their strength dipped significantly.
All right.
We saw the same thing with anti-estrogens. We saw the same thing with anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs and the like. So I've avoided those things for many, many, many years.
All right. So I have a question. So did you see those same results in people who were taking anabolic steroids at the time? Because I know that was one of the counters, that if you're taking metformin, then you really...
They were all on cycles.
Oh, really? And they
Yep.
still had loss.
They still had a loss. Yep. Now, I could see how it would not matter for a bodybuilder, particularly when he was on growth hormone, insulin, and steroids. But at that point, I just think there's better ways to improve insulin sensitivity than to try and use a mimetic that has a hypertrophy blunting and a mitochondria influencing effect. I just, I've never been a big fan of the insulin mimetics when the training and, things like a CPAP and D3, things that, I always said the things that are done to you or for you are not as effective as things you do for yourself. And so I tried to get on the front end rather than manipulate those things pharmaceutically on the back end. I wanted to get in front of that. And I've just had much better success doing that than trying to throw, these medications and stuff. That was just one example. And those, I've been around long enough, as have you, to watch these things come and go.
Right.
Those of us who've been around long enough have seen keto before. We saw the Atkins keto. We've tried it. We've tried less than 50 grams of carbs, and we've noticed that our strength and our muscle size depletes, particularly in a deficit. We've tried, different supplements. We were around long enough to use hot stuff and cybergenics.
Oh, yeah.
We've spent untold fortunes trying to, get an advantage in this industry, and the fundamentals have always far exceeded any of these, and food have always far exceeded any of the benefits from, most of the. There's some things that work. Obviously, anabolic steroids work, but they only work by increasing nitrogen retention. So you have to eat adequate food and have a significant training stimulus. Because I know thousands of guys who have used a lot of steroids over the years who don't have shit for strength or a physique. Right. So there's limits to everything. But I don't mean to ramble on. I'm just saying that I do follow those guys, and I'm always patient. I wait and watch. Sinclair's been talking about metformin for many, many years. And more recently has all of them, Atia, Longo, and others have started to say, oh, well, there might be some problems with that.
I knew Sinclair was only using it on days that he didn't work out, but if you listen to his workout schedule, he doesn't really, I think his workouts are kind of, spotty here and there, sort of thing.
Well, that's another thing. When a lot of these guys make mention, like, what was her name? Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Yeah, Rhonda Patrick, yep.
Also very, very smart, a lot smarter than me. She knows her biochemistry. Another example of people who try and talk about why things could work or should work and explaining the mechanisms of action. Got on Joe Rogan and said that intermittent fasting increased growth hormone and therefore helped build more muscle. And I'm like, wait, you jumped the moat. It might increase growth hormone. Yeah, that because it's, a lipolytic, and that happens when you need to metabolize fat for energy because you're fasted. But it does not build more muscle. Intermittent fasting does not build more muscle. So sometimes they jump the moat. Even really smart people like that will make a claim or suggest a mechanism of action that doesn't actually, in reality, provide the benefit that they suggest. So I'm really interested in what works. I'm really interested in what moves the needle. And the frustrating part about that is that there's not a lot of stuff out there that doesn't require you to do, a significant amount of work, time, discipline, consistency, progression, patience, recovery, deload, all that kind of stuff. You just got to keep going after it, man. And it's a long, hard slog once you've kind of maximized your genetic potential to add just a tiny little bit of strength or muscle, year over year. And it just, it can be frustrating, it can be discouraging, but
Well, and
if
I
you
think
stick with the fundamentals, I think you're going to get there.
I think that's why it's important. Like when people look at things, you know, and if somebody ever said to you, "Oh, well, your book's $100," I'd go, "Look, you know, $100. I want you to think about this because you take this book and you follow it. It can change your life. It'll change your health. You're going to tell me that that's not worth $100?" You know, they're looking at it from, and again, like you said, they don't understand all that went into making that book, and and for and to me, it's a steal, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
when you can have something like that that can change your life, you know, and you're gonna sit there and complain about it. You probably spend more than that when you go out to dinner with your wife or whatever. So,
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And
yeah,
it's not just a book about dieting, and it's so comprehensive. Um, the reason, and it's also a living document. The Vertical Diet 3.0 used to be the 1.0, it was originally released, and then the 2.0, and now the 3.0. Of course, that's how that works. I give the updates for free to anybody who bought a previous version. These aren't new books that I'm trying to resell to people. And then I've had over 50,000 DMs in the last 2 years since I released the book, version 1, questions that people asked me. I included the questions that were most commonly asked in the updated versions. So now I'm hearing from 50,000 people, and anybody who's ever sent me a DM probably got a response. I spend at least a couple hours a day quickly trying to give them a quick answer, maybe copy and paste an article or something right out of the ebook. I can often tell that most of the people who send me DMs have not read my book because the information's in there. So I'll tell them too. I'll call them out on it. I go, "Oh, look, tisk, somebody hasn't read the ebook," but I'll give them a quick answer. They'll ask like, "How much salt do I take?" And it says it right in the ebook. Prescription: salt meals to taste. Take 500 milligrams sodium before and after workouts. It doesn't get any easier than that. I'm very specific, and I get those kinds of questions all the time. But I also get feedback from people who I gave information to, who then told me how it worked for them. That is critical. Now I can see from, what's really working and what's not and why, and maybe if somebody had a problem. And that helps me refine my message, update the book so that I include not just the questions, but the answers as I would, presume them to be, but also what's worked for people. The vast majority of people. There's always going to be outliers that you can't address. And I try and go into that in the book, that some people may or may not respond accordingly, and then try and find some alternatives for them. But that's why it's turned into 220 pages. I think when I first released it, it was maybe 40 pages. It's just because I've added more and more information, made it easier to use.
Okay, so let me end with this. I want to do the vertical diet, but I do want to keep my super coffee smoothie. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like to I'll get with you, and I want to do the vertical diet, and what I'd like to do is take a certain amount of time to do it, and then have you come back on, let me give you the results and say, hey, now I don't want to hold, and this probably isn't fair doing this to you on camera. So if you say no, I completely understand, because I know you're a very busy man. But if you'd like to take the time, come on and let's talk about the experience. I want my viewers and listeners to understand exactly what happens, and so I can say, all right, this is what I experienced, and you can say, well, this is maybe what happened, or or this is why you were successful, or whatever, however it turns out, so they can see firsthand somebody who actually does it. Because I'm one of those people like you. You tell me what to do, I'll follow it to a T. And with the exception of my super coffee, which you said I could have. So.
Absolutely. That's the way it works. That's absolutely the way it works. Somebody tries the diet and, and tells me how it worked for them. That's how I learn. It's a collaboration. When I work with a client or an athlete or a coach, I'm always asking as many questions as I'm answering. And in that way, I continue to learn. And so it'd be very helpful. Be helpful for me as much as you and your audience. So let's do it.
All right, that sounds great. And I think, you hit on it earlier in the beginning of the show. Consistency is everything. And if you want to be successful at anything, and you're the living embodiment of that, that your success financially in the bodybuilding world, in the powerlifting world, and and everything that you do, it's because you're consistent. You're and persistent, if you will. And I think that's a big reason why you've been so successful.
Yeah, I've said that I didn't invent anything, but I will say this. I did trademark compliance is the science. So I do own that. And so that's what I stick with. Compliance is the science. I'm telling people that every day when I'm talking to clients, and like, compliance is the science.
I like that very much. Well, Stan, thank you for spending today with me, and you're a walking, talking encyclopedia. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to have to go back over this, like you talked about before. I'm going to have to go back over this myself and listen, because you gave so much great advice there. I'm going to take my yellow pad and write down everything that you were saying, because there's just a wealth of knowledge there that you dropped on us today. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. And thanks to your audience for listening. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. All right. Well, guys, listen, that's our show for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And remember to stay safe until next time, and wear your mask.